welcome to this December 12th, 2022 Town Council meeting, the Town of Garrett Park. Call this meeting to order. The time is 7:32. You have before you an agenda. Are there any changes to the agenda that anybody would like to make?
I've got two I'd like to propose. One is, in the first one, is it possible to move the town updates up a little bit further? Because I know there's a number of people who might be interested in listening to some of those. I'm sorry if you move them further up in the agenda somewhere.
Well, one thought I had was perhaps the Stratton redevelopment, Dick and Jerry sort of tag team that or following Mr. Martin's presentation, just so that we sort of have that discussion all together. As for the other ones, what do y'all think? Do you, I have no objection. Are there any particular ones that interest you that maybe we could?
Well, just think if we move the whole lot of them up, maybe we move the whole lot of them to be, about the 750 financial audit results, just as a way that way you just get it all done with the one.
Yeah, except that the audit, the folks who are doing the audit for us are sort of have scheduled.
Okay, fair enough, fair enough. After that?
Yeah. Do that. Want to try to keep those brief? So always, I know. It's always. All right. Any thoughts about, or let's vote you all in favor? Is there any objection to moving the town updates for tonight up to right before the town manager's report? Okay, with no objections. Steve, you okay with that?
If we do that, we should, I guess, try to keep all those updates pretty quick. I mean, it's a lot of,
Agreed.
it's a big change to push everything back.
I agree.
And then the other thing I had was I wanted to discuss the Waverly sidewalk at some point, just the fact that I've come up with some information that I've distributed to the council members, and I thought I could
Okay.
tell the town what I've done, and I can do that anyway.
Okay, well, let's put that under unfinished business
That'll work.
and keep it toward the top.
Right with me? That's it for me. Thank you.
Okay, any other any
Under-
changes to the agenda?
Under other items, I
Yes.
wanted to add where we are on the town hall RFP, the dog park retaining wall, the Yendel property RFP, the town office renovation, and just, I guess that's it.
So, Bart, do you have, are those things you can give quick updates on the status of those items?
Do you want me to say them again?
That would be helpful.
Okay, other items, the town hall RFP, the dog park retaining wall between the pool and the dog park. I don't know if you're gonna handle that, Mayor. The Yendel property RFP, the town office renovation, and I think that's it.
Okay, any other additions, changes, modifications?
Just a question. I'm sorry, but is that going to be under unfinished business? Or
That's going to be under manager's report.
manager's report?
Updates coming from the town.
All right. Okay, so we're going to do it in there. Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Okay, all right, with those changes in place, and you ready to approve the agenda? Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed? Hearing none, we approve the agenda. Next item are two sets of minutes. We need to approve those. Are there any changes? We distributed these minutes soon after each of those two meetings was held. We all had a chance to look at them. That being said, any changes that slipped through or any need to change anything that we didn't catch? Okay, well then let's look at the, or not look at, but the November 14th meeting, and without any objection, assume that, consider that approved, same with the work session minutes, we'll consider both of those approved. Now, let's see, the time is 7:37. We have presentations by residents. We were notified by Mr. Gordon Martin that he wanted to do a presentation for us. And that's why he's listed. This is not an exhaustive list, but I sort of thought that, that if we're notified in advance that someone wants to participate and make a statement, that especially if we know what the topic is, we can include it and just sort of give folks a heads up so that interested residents could listen in. So, Mr. Martin, if you would, here.
If you don't mind, I have my neighbors come up and help display the exhibit that I have. Sure.
Okay, we'll need you to just give the mic, tell us your name and your address.
I beg your pardon?
Need your name and address.
I'm going to get started on that. My name is George C. Martin Jr. I reside at 4513 Oxford Street, Garrett Park. Neighbors focus in, and I'm going to introduce you. I didn't have time to introduce them because you're giving me 10 minutes. I'm trying to put 50 pounds of ice in a 10-pound bag. So please bear with me. And if you could maybe hold off the questions until I'm through, and maybe I'll get this done. I appreciate it. I think earlier you were interested in what I had to say as far as what the state's plans are about the high sidewalk. So,
Yeah,
each of these exhibits I show, good. By the way, I've resided here since '63. I built my house here in '63, built my mother's house next door at that time, and $5,000 lot. It worked out very well. My children went to Garrett Park Elementary School and Point Cross and to the academy, and we've enjoyed a lifetime here of 62 years with my wife myself. It's been delightful.
I just want to point out a little bit that the reason that this is an issue right now, this week in particular, is because there's a hearing before the Montgomery County Planning Board. And this is what the position of Holy Cross and the diocese, their position for this meeting. And I'm planning to testify, so this is kind of part of preparation for that.
And that was, by the way, tomorrow at 9 o'clock, we have a virtual meeting with Montgomery County Planning Board on this very subject. And we get to it in a few minutes. Bear with me now. First of all, I want to tell you that the main problem I'm dealing with right now could have been resolved in the mid-1990s when the state of Maryland was going to rehabilitate Strathmore from the town of Garrett Park to Rockland Pike. That did not happen. It was vetoed by the governor at that time, and all the problems on how to deal with, well, including maybe this one, as a result of the fact that the governor vetoed a bill in the mid-1990s. I was involved in that, representing Holy Cross and the academy. So, and like I say, all the consequences of that failure I've been living with ever since. Let me walk through these certain. Let's start with G materials. Okay, and we'll have to pass around everybody so you can see.
Okay, we need you to speak in the microphone, please.
Okay, what you're looking at is a new development. I
You can go there, I'll go, yeah.
let me take it. Well, that works here. You want me to take it off again? No, you stay it, right?
Is that Vanna White?
Okay. Gene, can I have it back and I'll show the council what we're looking at?
Thank you, Gene.
No, I know, I've got a council member on the,
Let me show you. Okay. This is a 15+ acre development being done next to us at Holy Cross. It's composed of 9 single-family houses facing on Strathmore, 104 townhouses, and residential care EYA being the developer of 145 bed units for the senior living. Now, let me see that again if I can. The left-hand side of this development is primarily a contribution of one of the 3 partners. The 3 partners, one Academy of Holy Cross, They are contributing this land as far as their investment in this development. The center section is primarily the land provided by St. Angela's Hall, Sisters of the Holy Cross in Indiana, who they would use the proceeds for their retirement fund. And then the developers, EYA, of the whole mass. And they've experienced developers in this area of senior living. So what you're looking at again, remember in the middle, you have townhouses on the front, basically Strathmore, you have primarily a single family dwelling, and in the middle, you have the large senior living facility of 145 beds. Now, thank you, Eugene. This structure is significant. That's what I'm primarily dealing with tomorrow morning. And our primary objection is representing the parish of Holy Cross, and that is, to me, it's intrusive, and it should be intrusive. Leaving the town of Garrett Park, they're going to be looking at something that is very significant, and I think it'll be very difficult to screen from. So the question is, how is this mass going to be screened? And that's the purpose of the meeting tomorrow. I'm questioning the fact that it can be sufficiently screened by the vegetation they have planned. We will see. At some point, we're sure there'll be some accommodation because we're not there to defeat the project. We're there to mitigate the damage of this development in a number of ways. Primarily the mass, and the other is how it functions, because the parish of Holy Cross is going to be looking at the backside of this development. The trucks coming in to serve the senior living area will be coming on the edge of our property on the west border of Holy Cross Parish. And we're at the high point, that development is that they've taken advantage of the high elevation to put their high structure. And this will be very prominent. Well, people obviously coming from Washington, but they're also coming out of town primarily because you're in a basically relatively flat area.
How many
So-
stories? How
There
high?
you go. You're asking the question that I addressed to them 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago. Now I'm going to be talking about it tomorrow morning. I said, I have at least 8 site plans that deal with reforestation, stormwater, a number of issues that they're addressing on a horizontal plane. My problem is the vertical mass and how you screen it.
How tall is it, right?
Yeah, how tall is it? It has a maximum by code 50 feet, but it won't begin to approach that. I'm just saying it's the mass of it, and I think we need to address it. And now I'm going to be asking probably to cooperate with us in that regard. So,
George, isn't your rhetorical back to Lisa meant that no one has told us how high this facility is?
Gee, very good. That's my issue. You've done all this design work on a horizontal. You've dealt with all the issues that Montgomery County has to be very pleased with. It's a cash cow. When it's finished, it'll be very financially rewarding to the county. But why are they not addressing the vertical mass? That's my issue.
I appreciate that. I need to make sure that we keep moving, so I'm very much interested in hearing about this. What I would like to ask you to focus on is what you would like for us to do. I'm delighted in my remarks to the planning board later this week to echo some of these concerns. But I want to make sure that we sort of focus here. This is an issue that we've sort of talked about.
Let me deal with it. Let this commercial, please, beg me, let me finish my story as far as the commercial to Holy Cross and our experience with, and this plays into what I was playing with. The town is interested in the sidewalk, and I'm going to get that. Now, right now, you're looking in the back, the flooding that's taking place that was only resolved this past summer, at a cost to us of about $100,000 out of pocket. Did not come from the diocese. We paid for it out of our own. Recent campaign 60 for the parish to help the degraded, aging parish, and so we paid for it out of our pocket. We could not get the money from this the diocese because the diocese met with me in 2012 after we were being flooded for 2 years by the state. And said, George, they said exact word, we can't afford to fight state highway administration. Get a lawyer, do what you need to do. So I've been dealing with that's since 2012. I've been dealing with flooding. Well, okay. They will not do anything about it. It isn't until about 2018 that they said that they will do something if we gave them an easement from Strathmore to a creek bed on the west side of our oval. Now, let me, if I can show you. Okay. Hold this up. And okay, show it. See the oval there on the right hand, left hand side? That's the entrance to the church. You see it? The entrance to the church? See the left hand side?
Yes.
Okay, turn around here. Cindy's showing back. And you see the black and white line that represents piping, 36-inch concrete piping that's on the south side of Strathmore. That is for the single purpose of taking water that's coming, believe it or not, from Garrett Park Estates up into the Cameron Garrett Park to Dave Allamy's house at the high point of Kenworth. That is the watershed that feeds this entire area down here and across Strathmore to these culvert pipes. Now remember, they're saying we're not even going to do any of this unless you allow us to run our water, our Strathmore water, and building 547 to the creek bed down here at the lower, where the left-hand side of this picture. You'll see there's a creek bed at the lower end of that. That all this water from Strathmore feeds that. Now, I don't know how I'm going to get out of this right now. There's all this piping that's on our property. And they're not going to do anything about it. They're not going to apparently approve and do anything to Strathmore. However, when this was done, I had turned them and said, "When are you going to put the sidewalk in?" And they said, "We're not putting the sidewalk in." I said, "Oh, you're not? Hold on." I got in touch at that time with Khaki, with the mayor. I said, "Khaki, guess what? I just talked to the State Highway Administration, and they said no sidewalk." And she said, "Really?" So what Khaki did at this time, she gets in touch with the people of Garrett Park Estates and White Flint and all the rest, puts together a group, meets with state delegates. Now, I've been trying to meet with state, I've been with at least 6 state delegates, walk them through this flooding.
George, I understand, and I appreciate the history.
Well,
No, I know, but we have a really full agenda. My understanding is that part of the staff recommendation for this is to require there be pedestrian access on this space. So I do think it's positive.
At a Zoom meeting, in April, the developer was on showing their intended project, and they said, "This is what it's going to look like." And he said, "Wait a minute, you show trees that appear to be outside the property. Is that going to involve our shielding policy?" So, but more importantly, you're showing. It's in the next picture. This one right here, Michael, if you could. Two things I want to show you real quick. See that? That is the replacement of the culvert pipe. We had to spend $100,000 to remove because ours was clogged up due to sediment that had filled the old culvert pipe. Okay, the other part of this is essentially turn that quickly. See this mass here, this line here? This is an acre of ground that runs from St. Angeles all the way to the town of Garrett Park. That strip of land is very similar that was put next door at St. Anne Academy. But they deeded it to the state. They deeded this area widening of Garrett Park of 547 to the state. We did not. We own this land. So in the Zoom meeting we had in March, showing the sidewalk that the developers put in, not the state. The state, the developer agreed as part of their deal on the permit to put in the sidewalk all the way to the town of Garrett Park. And I found it kind of before the cross.
Yes, and my understanding is that the staff recommendation is to work with you or work with however to make this happen so that the sidewalk does continue to hold. I understand that.
Almost. No, to answer your question, not yet.
Okay,
But that's, the meeting tomorrow has to do with the screening, it does not have to do with the sidewalk. But right now, the state in 2018 came up with their own plan for the sidewalk. Curving up and like, they were gonna do it. It's an Alchubo solution. It was simply curb and sidewalk, no planning, no nothing. What the developer next door planned to do was to put in bike lanes and an enhanced expansion of Strathmore. And that was a big deal, because that would cost millions of dollars, whereas the town is gonna do something for $500,000. And way just curb and sidewalk. Right now, that's where we're waiting for the state to make a move as to what they're gonna do with sidewalk.
okay.
Okay.
We can absolutely make sure that that is, something that we urge them to do, is to engage with you on that.
I just have one question for George, and Cindy.
Yeah.
This makes sense to bring up the concept of them wanting to use wildlife and put wildlife.
Okay,
Just real briefly. One of the proposals.
One thing that our demand expansion, that on the sidewalk is the fact that we limited to no more than 15 feet from the curb on the back of the sidewalk. The expansion they're talking about doing, this generous expansion, probably be as much as 30 feet. The developer is going to do it. Yeah, under the obligation we have with the state, they're going to do it. But we do not want to give up that much field. It gives up too much of our property. So our position and what we're going to fight for is the Academy Holy Cross has 15 feet. The town of Garrett has 15 feet. The most we'll allow is 15 feet.
Not 30.
we will, we'll make sure, that we're echoing that, because it does make sense to try to have that be a more gentle easement into Garrett.
That may be indeed, but the developer's not putting it on their own property. There's generous expansion of the sidewalk and a pipeline that exists on their property. When they come to our property, they zip into us. It's shown by the one plan. Okay, that one plan shows there will be a. Yeah, real quick.
Okay, yeah, one minute, and then we really do need to, point it out.
Yeah, see this, down there, two couple things that happen. One, these things right here, these orange plates are the pads, the bus pads that Montgomery County put in our trench, in our reserve trenches. We lost that in that cavity that would help stop the flooding. And that was being happening at the same time that the state of Maryland was allowing silting up all the ditches so that our they over flooded as it is by that picture right there. So, I like to put the jog plan, yeah, that one have it there as a film.
Gotcha, so they're having the 30 feet expand or move into, yes, in a pretty way into.
Listen, bit I can just, you got me on such a tightrope. I need to have an opportunity following our meeting tomorrow with the planning board as to whether their disposition on our position on screening. It's something that you have to be interested in, correct?
Yes.
The screening is bad, and you have to be interested in the sidewalk. So you have two things that we're interested in, and we can join forces as allies to get this thing settled. Right now, we suffer consequences of an out of control state.
Okay, is this an open meeting, or is this just between you and the planning board?
Right now, this is just the three, because like the rest of you could sign up for the hearing on the 15th.
Right.
But I decided to sign up 15, and I may or may not use up, but they want to talk to me before then. So we're just going to play everything right next to them, rooming underneath them.
Please.
George, is there also a concern that the project is going to exacerbate the stormwater management issues that the?
On their own plan, there are 3 acres of the 50 some acres is green and part of the stormwater system. So no, they've taken care of stormwater, and they're on the downside into the creek bed. We were at that plateau between the town of Garrett Park and a slight rise where it's St. Angela's. So we were stuck in the middle. We were getting flooding because that flat plain was, we were getting on the park.
George, I really appreciate your being here. I would be delighted to talk with you after your meeting.
I'm going to have another meeting with this council to talk further. It just goes on, because to me, this is more important than Mrs. Murphy's shed, whether it's 3 feet off the property line or 5 feet off the property line.
It is.
This is going to be a big deal for the town going forward. This is development you're going to have to live with a long time. Are you going to work with this? That's what we need to hear.
I hear you. It's not something that we can do right now, but it is something that we will continue to be engaged. We have a conversation.
One, yes, just a question for you. As citizens, can we send you an email with that?
So citizens, you can sign up as to speak during the hearing itself.
And I can relay my concerns to you. You are,
You're welcome to do so. Thank you. Welcome to email me and your concerns and we can try to. Okay. Are there any other? Thank you, George. Really appreciate it. 10. This is a separate issue?
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
Don't worry about it.
Okay, your name and address, and please receive your
Words from my editor and to the board of members. Three very good topics, and we'll take about it. The first one is about the year 2023 budget. The Barbara's prepared a draft on that you're going to vote on today. I provided the council with my comments on that draft budget. I think generally it's very good. I have 3 suggestions for specific changes. I hope that you have read my email in the supposition that maybe some of you have not, but pass around and write it down. The one pager that I provided you. I think the most important part is of the 260 million that Barbara's proposed to go to capital, the additional funds for capital.
260,000.
260,000. The 260,000 that's going in addition to capital, not any is going to alcohol, but that's really what we like to do now. So lots of worry. Second point is quasi. I think I oftentimes provide comments to the town council. I say that when I provide comments to my congressman or my senator, I always get a response to usually on the form or nonetheless I get a response. When I do it to the Montgomery County representatives or state representatives, likewise, at least I receive something. By and large, not everybody, but by and large, I receive no comments from the council, and that's disrespectful. I would urge you to be more mindful of that in the future. I think it's disrespectful not provide. If they're provided to the council. Now, the disputes of that, but I don't think I can, but anyway. And the third is on the topic that Lisa said that she would like to raise today, which is the town hall. Not only does it not the mid-year budget not provide any additional funds for the town hall, there's no mention of it whatsoever in the mid-year budget. I think that when I talked with people around town, to be perfectly frank, they are really surprised that they are doing this. There was that long discussion among town residents about 3 months ago. People assumed that shortly thereafter the narrative would be released. It's not been, and from what I gather, it's unlikely to be released in December. So you're waiting for next year. I've done one calculation. If for each month of the letter with construction inflation as it is, and then the cost of the renovation, let's say the hypothetical 1.8 million, you're talking about $15,000 a month in inflation cost as a result of delay in getting this project underway. So my proposal to you is to set up a timeline for between now and December of 2024, when the contract needs to be signed, if you're going to use the ARPA money. My suggestion is you have a timeline so that you can be ready to sign that contract before December of 2024. That's it. I agree with that.
Thank you. Appreciate that very much. Are there any other residents who want to make presentations? Anyone online? Not hearing any, let's see, the time is 8:02. We would like to move on to the 2022 financial audit results. We have with us Christopher Lehman and Stephen McCall. You are welcome. There you go.
Oh, good evening, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. And what I'll do here, I have a brief presentation. I'm going to share my screen here and walk through. If I can get the technology piece working. Can you all see the presentation?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, great. So again, I'm Chris Lehman. I was the engagement partner for this year's financial statement audit. In addition, Bill Seymour was our advisory partner, and Stephen McCall was our engagement manager. Our scope of services that we were engaged to perform is we were engaged to perform an audit of the June 30, 2022 financial statements for the town. In addition, we assist with the preparation of the uniform financial report that goes to the state of Maryland upon completion of the audit. Here's just a high-level summary of the results of the audit. We've issued a clean or unmodified opinion on the financial statements. That would be the best opinion we can give under professional standards, and that says that the town's financial statements are reasonably free of material misstatement. We did not discover any instances of fraud during the audit. A financial statement audit is not a forensic audit, but we are required to have a healthy skepticism that fraud could be perpetrated by anyone at any time. We did not identify any material weaknesses in the internal controls, and in a couple slides, I'll have a summary of the control environment, as well as the key factors that we considered in the control environment and the specific controls. And then in addition, we received the full cooperation of management. So any records that we requested, we obtained adequate support for those records. Any questions that we had, we obtained timely and adequate responses on those questions. This slide here is just a picture of our risk-based audit approach. I'm not going to go through the gory details of how the audit works, but the next couple of slides will go through our assessment of the internal control environment, which we do in the second phase here, which we understand the design and the operation of key controls and how that impacts the financial statements. And before we get into specific key processes or key controls, we also assess the town's control environment as it relates to the accounting function and the financial reporting function. And there's 5 interrelated components that we look at. There's the control environment, there's management's risk assessment process, the specific control activities, the information and communication, and then the monitoring of those controls. And during the period under audit, we concluded that there was an effective control environment. And then the key processes from a treasury perspective, looking at cash and investment reconciliations. Also, there's certain estimates within the financial statements, the financial reporting process, looking at the expenditure and the revenue cycles. We've concluded that both the design and the operation of the controls were effective for the period under audit. And then on this slide, this is just kind of the key audit areas, if you will, just because of the inherent nature of some of the accounts. Again, looking at cash and investment reconciliations to make sure those are done accurately and on a timely basis. We also perform certain testing to make sure liabilities are captured in the proper period and that the liabilities are complete as of the fiscal year end period. We also look at, within the general fund, the fund balance classifications, as well as the net position classification on your entity-wide financial statements. We also spend time looking at revenue recognition to make sure revenue is not only recorded in the proper period, but meets GASB's revenue recognition criteria, as well as making sure expenditures are booked to the proper account and in the proper period. Are there any questions so far? I just don't want to go too fast.
No.
Okay.
I had one question. Does this cover any specific projects, or is it the town budget?
No, this would be the financial statements as a whole. So annually, the town's required to issue a standalone set of financial statements that covers all the GASB requirements. So it's really just looking at your annual financial statements as a whole.
Okay, bigger picture. Thank you.
Yep. And then just to kind of give you guys that bigger picture, I've got the financial kind of highlights here from an entity-wide perspective. So this is the balance sheet, or what's termed your statement of net position for the fiscal year ended 2021 and 2022. And you'll see that total assets have increased year over year for the town to just over 5.7 million. Now, predominantly what your current and other assets, that's predominantly cash and investments. There's also a small portion of accounts receivable in this balance. And your cash is up because of the ARPA funding that had been received during the fiscal year that had not been spent yet. So you'll see that's why there's an uptick here in the current assets for the town. On the liability side, there's also an increase in the liabilities, and that ties to the deferred revenue that was recorded for ARPA. And that ARPA money will be recognized as revenue over time as there's qualifying expenditures that are spent into in future periods. So you'll see both total assets and total liabilities up year over year, and that's predominantly due to ARPA funding. And then from a net position perspective, you'll see total net position of the town did increase year over year. So total net position increased from 4.8 million to just over 5.1 million. And then the next slide that I'll get into will show you the components of that increase. Any questions here on the statement of net position?
No.
Okay, hearing, was that one or no? Okay, and then moving on to the statement of activities, this shows the town's entity-wide revenues as well as expenses. In total revenues down year over year. That is predominantly due to a sidewalk grant that was received back in 21. So you'll see operating and capital grants can kind of fluctuate from year to year depending on what those grants are received and what they're used for. So that sidewalk grant ended back in 2021. So you will see that operating and capital grants did take a dip. And that's the primary driver of that decrease in the revenue year over year. On the expense side, you'll see expenses are up slightly from 1.5 million to just under 1.6 million for the year. And you'll see the functional categories that make these balances up. So all in, that did lead to a positive change in net position for the town for the year. So that was a positive change of 242,000 of positive change in net assets. Any questions on that?
No. No.
Okay. And then the last few slides, I'm not going to read through each one of these points, but this would be my opportunity to let the council know if we had any issues getting through the audit. Like I had mentioned at the beginning, if we had found fraud, if we had material weaknesses in the internal controls, if we had audit adjustments that we had proposed through the audit process, if we had difficulties getting through the audit, or if we had disagreements with management, I'd be required to bring that to your attention through the audit process. And there's really nothing of a negative nature I would need to bring to the council's attention through the audit process. And then lastly, I did include my contact, or our whole team's contact information here in the last slide. So that way, if there's any questions or concerns kind of outside of audit season, we make ourselves available not only to management, but to council as well, if there's anything you would like to or need to discuss with us. So with that, I'll just open it up if there's any questions, or if not, if Barb has anything to add.
I want to say really quick before we proceed with that this report is on our website already. It's been put up there as it relates to the agenda for today's meeting. It'll also be put under the audit section later this week. So this is available for anybody to see.
Will we also get the slide deck that you just presented?
Yes, I can share that with you all. It will also be incorporated by reference as part of the minutes for this meeting.
Great, thanks.
No, I think the only thing I'd like to say is just, Chris, thank you to you and your team. I think the audit went very smoothly. This was my first time with you all. I came in sort of at the tail end of the last audit. So I just want to thank you all for your partnership with getting this done.
Yep, it was a pleasure working with you.
want to say thanks to Barb and Kayla for their work, making sure that it goes smoothly from our end. Thank you. Okay, if there are no questions, we can say thank you to Chris and move on with our meeting.
Okay, well, thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Chris.
Yeah, bye.
Okay, the time is 8:12, and as we adjust our agenda to the town updates, I'm going to go to those. The first part is an update publicly to me about the first is about the grotto property. This is we have a couple of photos from the event that Barb is going to share. This was a really small event. There were max 15 people there. And it was a recognition of the time and energy that that Peggy and Dick Pratt have put into the town of Garrett Park. And they have offered to donate to the town of Garrett Park this grotto property. One of the photos that Barb has is a picture, I think that was one of the pictures that I sent of the grotto. This is a place, for those of you who don't know, it's on Argyle Avenue, and it's a strip of land between the bottom two houses on Argyle, sledding it. And it's okay, so there's Dick and Peggy Pratt with beautiful flowers that our wonderful Elizabeth Henley brought as a thank you. So while the donation is not yet complete and we don't have ownership, and this is a group photo, the Pratts, 2 of their 3 children were able to join us for the event. While the donation is not yet complete, we wanted to take advantage of the weather still being nice. Here it is. To hold this event while the Pratts are still in good health and were able to join us. So here you can see a small inscription on a bench. This was actually a makeshift bench. We borrowed one that we put this plaque on. And but we will be getting a permanent one once we have final donation, once the final donation is complete. So it was a lovely event. The weather cooperated perfectly. So that's the grotto. It'll probably take the better part of 6 months for us to finalize the terms of this donation. But we wanted to make sure that we could recognize it as quickly as we could, even though it's anticipated. So that's the grotto. The next is with regard to the dog park. And that is, this update is a non-update, meaning that we are waiting. This has to be on hold. Because we're waiting for engineers to conduct a survey. And that survey is part of work being done on the pool property to shore up the historic wall on that side. So we're doing a survey, so we're waiting for that. And the other piece is it's come to our attention that the Montgomery County Planning Board will require us to go through the mandatory referral process. This is an application where we send them our ideas, and they basically have to approve it. Any changes and updates to park property, even though it's a Garrett Park property, it still needs to go through this process. So we're getting a handle on what this mandatory referral process is. So I just want you to know that we're kind of in a holding pattern. Do you have a question?
I do.
Really briefly, if you can.
So briefly,
Please.
representing the pool board, of course, the work on the wall, we would want that done by May.
Okay.
I'm Dean Rand, I'm on the Garrett Park Swimming Pool Board.
Okay. So those are separate issues.
I'm just asking for clarification, because you mentioned it, sir, but you didn't say anything about.
So that is the plan. So these are getting the survey and its applicability to the dog park is a separate issue from fixing the wall, shoring up that wall on the pool side of or a full portion of that, sort of sinking area.
Okay, can you give us any idea on when that may?
So Barb will include that, in her report in just a few minutes.
Okay, great, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, let's,
Is there any reason not to just have Barb do that now?
okay, sure. Barb, can you give us a quick update on the timeline for getting that work done, for the wall on the property?
Sure. We just received the work order from the engineering firm last week. I shared that with the mayor and councilmember Schultz. It's been signed. The survey has been commissioned. That will take approximately 8 weeks. Part of that is to kind of help figure out the boundaries of kind of what we're dealing with as a possible repair. As Joanna mentioned, the information gathered through the pool wall repair will actually inform kind of what we're dealing with as far as the dog park property. The engineer and I did talk about the fact, Jean, that you all would undoubtedly want this work done prior to the pool opening. The plan is to find a writable Montgomery County contract, so we can cut off some time by having to competitively bid it on our own. This would be a county contract that's already been competitively bid. So the engineer is aware of the timing concern, and so that's kind of what we settled on as a way of expediting the work.
So for clarification, that would mean that basically we would tack on to a Montgomery County contract that's already underway, if you will, so we don't have to go through the whole process.
Right. Yeah, the county has a number of contracts that they've already competitively bid as a municipality. Generally, the way the county and many others in the area write their contracts is they can be essentially piggybacked on by another governmental entity. So that's what we will be planning to do. So it's not a case, just to alleviate anyone's concern, that the contract would have been competitively bid, just not by us, by the county.
Or we met with an engineering firm to repair the wall a while ago. Are we starting over or?
I'm sorry, I am having some trouble hearing you all. If you could please just be really vigilant about talking into the mics. We're having some distortion tonight.
We're getting back on.
Yeah.
Sorry, that was me.
Kayla's taking the blame.
So I met with an engineer at the dog park to look at the wall a few months ago.
Right, they had a delay basically in getting us the work order.
So are we stopping that now and starting over on a different process? Or is that firm gonna still do the work? I'm just confused as to who's on first.
Well, basically, the engineering firm has to have commissioned the survey, as the mayor mentioned. They will be looking, as will I, for a competitively awarded Montgomery County contract. We will basically, through that process, identify the contractor to actually do the repair work.
If I understand your question correctly, Lisa, when the group of us met out there, we looked at things. What we were doing is talking with one of the principals at our town civil engineering firm, who in turn provided us with a work order, basically outlining what they were going to do. We just recently got that signed that I approved, and then the mayor approved it. So we recently got that signed, so that allows them to proceed with doing all the work of the survey, which will be followed by a structural engineer coming up with some plans as to how to actually execute the work. And then from that, then we will go to this, I guess, tack on to Montgomery County bid to have the physical work done.
And that's just to repair the wall. We're not talking about doing any work on the dog park.
The only thing that will be done on the dog park is that there will be a small excavation done to see what's down there. But other than that, nothing. And the work is only really the pool side.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil.
Okay. So let's see, Jerry, if you could talk with us what you'd like to add to what was discussed by Mr. Martin regarding the Strathmore redevelopment.
Right, thank you. As Mayor Welch said, the planning board has scheduled a hearing for the preliminary plan review for the development on December 15th. We don't have the exact time, it's number 5 on the agenda. The meeting begins at 9 a.m. And as I'm not available, I'm very pleased that Mayor Welch is able to testify on behalf of the town. I did provide the council and the mayor a draft testimony, and what I wanted to do was just go over tonight the 6 themes and recommendations that I'd like to see us include, and just get a sense of the council about whether we're in the right direction. We do have to submit our testimony by noon on Wednesday. So the 6 themes that I included in the draft are 1, reducing the number of entrance and exits directly to Strathmore Avenue to no more than 2. There are currently 3 in the design. I think they could get rid of the truck entrance behind the building. And also thereby improve pedestrian safety on the sidewalk there. Consider adding an eastbound left-hand turn lane from Strathmore Avenue onto Stillwater Avenue to facilitate eastbound traffic flow with design considerations for pedestrian safety. It is tight there because there is a little bridge and creek shortly west of that Stillwater Avenue. But depending upon what state specifications are, it's possible that there isn't for that. So it would be good to know if they consider that, and if it's perhaps being left out due to engineering considerations of design requirements. Third, support the Department of Transportation condition that the developer provide adequate pedestrian facilities along Strathmore Avenue eastbound to meet up with the sidewalk at Kenilworth Avenue. This statement is neutral as to the width. The materials provided online indicate that the state acknowledges that they still need to negotiate with Holy Cross and that the size may need to be reduced accordingly. I personally think the town should remain neutral on.
Can you clarify Holy Cross Academy of or Holy Cross Church?
Holy Cross Church. So the sidewalk, they're required to provide a pedestrian facility both in front of the development, and they're now, this is new, this was not in the information provided last year, it's new this year, that they would also be required to extend that sidewalk all the way up to Kenilworth, almost all the way up to Kenilworth.
Yeah.
So I just am recommending that we support that in a neutral way in terms of sizing and specifications. That's my recommendation. And 4, ensure that there is planned additional MCPS elementary school space within the cluster to support this additional housing. They do provide very minimal information in the staff report about the numbers at the school now and the allowances, but it doesn't seem to indicate that there's any look at other planned developments in the area, and when you put all the cumulative additions into the school, whether it would this, in addition to all those other developments, would put up the elementary school over. So I just think that's another point worth emphasizing. Ensure the playground facility is both adequately sized and placed within the new residential area to support single family home townhomes. If you look at where the playground is located, it's across their main street of the development. So children would have to cross from the home area across what appears to be a potentially busy street to get to the playground. It looks pretty small. And that is a point that several residents have emailed about throughout this process. One reason for the town to comment on that is it puts a drain on other playgrounds in the area if they don't provide adequate facilities for the residents of the town, for the new development. And then finally, support the request of Holy Cross Church for additional landscape screening of the care facility, truck loading zone area above Strathmore Avenue church property. I think this benefits the town, not just because we have residents who would experience it when they're at church, but also when you're driving to Strathmore Avenue. I don't think any of us want a big commercial like truck loading area so close to Strathmore Avenue in what's currently a green tree lined area. So those are the main themes. Are there any additional themes or any major modifications?
Did anybody raise a bike lane as part of the sidewalk construction?
Well, that is what the county is proposing, a mixed-use pedestrian facility that would, have room for both pedestrians and bikes. That's why I'm recommending neutrality on the town's part, because I think they'll negotiate what works with the owners of the property.
Those owners being
Holy
Holy
Cross.
Cross.
So that's between the 15 feet and the 30 feet?
Right,
Right.
right. So it's possible it might be wider in front of the development and then get narrower in front of Holy Cross because the state doesn't have a right of way. They have to negotiate with Holy Cross.
And Holy Cross wants it to be narrow.
Okay, as Ridge was.
Well, the reason they want to be more narrow is because. There,
So what are your thoughts about, since we're talking about that, a neutrality on that second point on the width? How do you all feel about maintaining neutrality? I mean, this is not policy. This is just sort of informing what is the message that we want to put forth in our testimony.
I personally would, and being, full disclosure, I am a member of Holy Cross Church, but that notwithstanding, I would think it would be better to go with the standard size sidewalk end to end, because no matter what happens, it's going to neck down, either it's going to neck down at the Garrett Park, line, because we have our sidewalks, Strathmore sidewalks, and they're narrower than the 10-foot or wider proposal that they have. There's also the ability for bikers to use the access road, if you will, that runs parallel to this. So I think it's a safe way for bikers to get to and from.
What access road is that?
It's the one that's right across, from the Holy Cross and St. Angela Hall.
The access road that parallels Strasbourg?
Stratford, yes.
Right.
Yes. And I mean, even once you get to the end of the development, you're going to hit a bridge, which is only, 5 foot wide or thereabouts. So my concern would be also that would the state now tell us that we have to widen our sidewalk to meet the wider width of their sidewalk from the point basically where the town ends all the way up to at least the intersection there.
The specifications do require the developer to expand the bridge to accommodate the wider bike lane. In my opinion, I don't think the state would have the ability to widen the sidewalk in Garrett Park because of the historic nature and historic district. I think that would protect us from that.
That being the case, it wouldn't make much sense to have it widen and they're neck down. And even so, you would, once you go across the bridge, you're now to the sidewalk, which is in front of Symphony Park, and that's going to be narrower. So to me, it would make more sense to advocate for a narrower sidewalk, reduce the amount of contention between all the parties to try and get the sidewalk moving forward, rather than trying to advocate for a wider sidewalk, which is going to neck down at either end anyway.
Right, but if we remain neutral, then we're not advocating either way. Just sort of emphasizing that we think it's important to have. So, Steve, you look like you might have some business.
Yeah, I was afraid of too much background noise, but wanted to echo some of what Phil was saying. It's probably 6 feet asphalt in front of Symphony Park, and it's 5 feet in Garrett Park. We don't really have public right of way wide enough. It's the same issue that happened on Oxford. It was barely wide enough for a sidewalk, so you can't really put in what the county might want in through Garrett Park, even if they requested it. There's just not enough area to do it. I have a feeling that they're probably just going off of guidelines and things that they do a lot up county that just don't really work in this area. So hopefully there's a way to kind of get them to be a little bit more reasonable about these things. I think it's some of the same people who advocate and build bike lanes that go 2 blocks and then stop and start. Nobody uses them. So, I mean, going from a 6-foot sidewalk to a 10, 12-foot wide dual lane bike path and then back down to a 5-foot sidewalk that people ride bikes on every day just doesn't make any real sense. But that may or may not be easy to get them to acknowledge when they have the pressure of their standards.
So is that, are you saying you'd rather it would take a position on that, or would you like us to be neutral on this position of the width of the sidewalk?
I would think if it doesn't hurt us on advocating on the screening and anything else, then maybe I wouldn't mind including it. But if it's going to weaken those other positions and, let that feedback get back to them on the width elsewhere, so it would definitely get to them. Whatever's going to be the most effective to kind of open up their ears, because I would be talking.
Concern about that I have about taking a stand to propose the smaller width. We are leveraging the bicycle master plan for several of our other homes, particularly the curb cut issue, and asking for one fewer entrance. So it is the bicycle master plan that is calling for the right of width of the sidewalks. So I definitely agree we do not want to advocate for the wider width. I'm just more comfortable with neutrality, but I'll go with whatever you all want.
Is it an option to advocate for a narrower width?
It's an option. I just think it weakens our other bicycle master plan leveraging in the best way.
You forgive me, so why would it weaken our?
So in our current draft testimony and in our previous testimonies, we have cited a bicycle master plan as a reason for having fewer curb cuts and fewer entrances into the new development for bicycle and pedestrian safety. So it's the bicycle master plan that also calls for that on a certain type of bicycle, Strathmore Avenue is designated as a certain type of bicycle facility. And so we're citing that, but this argument that it should be narrower and not follow the master plan on the width is a little bit counter. I don't think it's the end of the world if we conflict it. But
I mean, we can change your mind, I would assume, and this way to pose is not necessarily with what we're saying. Again,
I also tell you the statement urging that they work together before we cross, with the owners of the to come to a speedy resolution.
is that point considerable enough to be slowing people down? That's what it sounds like.
It's dragged out for years.
Yeah, I mean, just based on what George said, the problem's going to be they're going to add widths, which will dig further into the whole cross property, and I think that's where the rub's going to come, and that's where I'm thinking that maybe we advocate for a narrower sidewalk as a way of trying to get the sidewalk moving forward rather than allowing it to just sit there, because my concern is that now it's going to drag on as we have a property debate, and who knows, maybe somebody, the developer throws their hands up and says, well, fine, we're not going to do it.
Yeah, the provision they have put into the requirements is that the developer pay for it, whether or not the developer is able to do it, so that if they're not able to accomplish it and build it within 12 months, that they would pay for what the projected cost would be regardless.
Pay to who?
To the state or to the county.
So
They will pay for the sidewalk regardless.
But we've got to make sure that it actually gets built.
Yeah.
Right. I think it's a good point that they can use the auxiliary road, and once you get to Kenilworth, you can go down Oxford to get to the park.
Right.
So that all makes sense to me.
Of course, that's requiring them to do a little bit of zigzagging.
Right, but it's doable.
So it sounds like we kind of all want to direct them to negotiate, to truly, in good faith, negotiate with Holy Cross and
Build the
and
sidewalk.
do sidewalk, but also.
not necessarily a wider one.
Right. Okay.
I'm
Keep
good
it
with
as
that.
narrow as possible.
All right.
Any other?
But not doing the curb cuts, I think is a good idea.
Agreed.
Yes, I wanted to mention that one piece of this development that had been desired, one additional piece was getting direct access for the residents of this new development to the metro. And that is not something that has sort of made it to the final push by planning staff. So I wanted to mention are disappointed. So the expectation is that residents who live in this new development will either walk up to Rockville Pike and access the metro from Rockville Pike, or they will come south to us and walk behind.
What about the path that goes up to Strathmore,
I'm not-
behind Symphony Wood?
Yeah, they go by the Symphony Stormwater Pond. Is usually the
Right,
fastest.
and, right, that is currently what is expected the new residents will use to get to the metro.
Right.
But it was hoped that there would be more direct access going directly, what was that? South from the new development to Metro. So just wanting to mention that it would have been nice, disappointed that that wasn't.
Could,
Yeah.
could we ask for a bridge or something to be built as a way of accessing that path a little faster as a compromise?
I don't think it's very that simple.
Well,
Hearing last spring, they talked, apparently they did pursue something along those lines, and I think A, Symphony Park was not amenable to such an arrangement, and B, I think they just couldn't quite find the engineering solution that seemed to be for them.
that I think, and I may be wrong, but that I think had to do with the car access versus the pedestrian access, because I think Joanne was talking about pedestrian access.
Correct.
And so the thought was, could they build a bridge across the wetlands or the stream, whatever you want to call it, as a way of accessing that path we just talked about, which runs along the fountain by Symphony Park, because that way people have two choices. If you live on one end, you basically go around and walk the whole thing, or the other end, just cut across the bridge and down.
I don't have a problem mentioning, I would say that's the moment as well.
I would be happy to mention that, and we're disappointed that this hasn't happened, but considering that that space is going to be untouched, that wetland space, saying that we hope that they will consider for future development or improvement, access to that space.
I think it would be good.
Okay, is there anything else that caught attention for wanting to include in this testimonial? Okay. All right.
I recognize the residents.
Oh, sorry.
I do have one, sitting in one of the presentations with the developer, we asked that they consider a path that the kids could use to walk to Garrett Park, maybe even like a backdoor path, okay, that was a definite no, we won't do it. So respectfully suggesting that perhaps she might want to consider requesting some kind of informal path. So you had a better description of it.
So what the deal is here is that we figured that the children who would be residing in, well, I guess my wife and I, others, Holy Cross Parish Council. So the thought was is that, and I had actually mentioned this during the very first meeting that we had with the YA, and it was the children there will be a number of children who will probably be going to Garrett Park Elementary School, and if you look at the current plan, they'd be forced to have to walk all the way down Strathmore, up Kenilworth, up Oxford, and get to school, versus what most kids will probably do is basically cut across the bottom of the playing field, jump the fence, and get to the school. And so I said, why don't you consider putting in a path, just do it, because in that way, the kids will be safer than having to jump the fence, won't be repairing fences, won't have to place blah, blah, blah. Well, there was objections from the Holy Cross at the Academy of the Holy Cross regarding that, but I still, right, but I still believe it should be asked for. I mean, Holy Cross is in fact providing, as part of this deal, will be providing those fields that we see now, and I don't see a reason why they shouldn't be able to provide an easement across the bottom of their, their new playing fields, new area to allow a sidewalk for kids to be able to walk from the development over, rather than having to jump the fence, which they'll probably do, or having to walk all the way around. And it would eliminate the need for a bus, because I don't know what the distance is, but they measure distance by the way you walk. It's possible that they could get itself far enough that it becomes needs a bus route. And I know that this has happened in some spots in the estates where people are on buses because it's too far to walk. It may not be far enough, but if you trace the whole path out, it could be. But I just think it would be a good idea to request that.
Would that take into consideration what I assume, the academy would slightly fence their property more than once, both in the front and the back. So I think maybe I'm assuming, they must assume that there'll be two fences to jump and not only one, therefore prohibiting anybody to do so, but or hoping so.
Brother, good job to church. That's, you know, I mean,
No, that a desired path will show up eventually, but a number of kids.
Wouldn't such a path to cross both Academy and Holy Cross Church indoor school property?
I don't believe it needs to cross the church because, no, as a matter of fact, it doesn't, because Holy Cross
Wraps around.
wraps around the back of the
The school wraps around right to the outdoor playground of Holy Cross. I'm sorry, Garrett Park Elementary. We can jump the fence at Garrett Park Elementary and be on Holy Cross Academy grounds.
Okay. Anything else on the structural rebuilding?
That's all I have.
Okay, Councilmember Max, any update on the archives? What's been happening with the archives?
Claire said that they had a meeting, on November 17th. And, they talked about, possible future exhibits, including featuring 125 objects that tell the story of Garrett Park, and a future Veterans Day exhibit featuring Paul Edlund, who was a former town council member and mayor, and he served in World War II. They're going to continue to collect materials from residents about COVID-19 and how we dealt with it. Malcolm Russell Einhorn will take over the responsibilities as committee chair from Karen Thiel. There's a new exhibit in the lobby of Penn Place telling the story of the building of St. James Chapel, the town hall, and features copies of original contractors' bids and planning documents. They're working a new something to be done for the 125th anniversary of the town. I think they're talking about doing that in July as part of July 4th.
Yeah.
And that's about it.
All right. Councilmember Paskowski. Historic preservation, land use.
Sorry, I was on mute. Double header here. So preservation had a good meeting. I think it was last week. Worked on a lot of the variance packet that is up for an action item today. George Martin came from Land Use Advisory Committee as well and talked with the whole group about that, as did the architect for the owner. So I had a productive session on that, which ended up with those two reports that everyone has. There's another property on, that's for a property on Montrose. There's another property on Waverly that's going through revisions on its historic area work permit. They're hoping to get county approval early next year, so they have a hearing scheduled. So the Historic Preservation Committee, ours, is going to meet early January to kind of review that with the ownership of that house. Also talked about the walking tour that's been kicked around for a couple of years now. The thinking on that is to kind of really plan it thoroughly and make it possibly more comprehensive and handle more than just historic architecture and things that might be on the historic master plan from the county, but it could be other things about social history on Garrett Park. It could be things about certain trees. So the committee welcomes collaboration with other groups in town to kind of brainstorm on what residents may have an interest in having on such a site. And the general thinking on it currently is that it might be something where there might be a couple markers around town where you'd be able to use a QR code or a web link on your phone. It's almost virtually everyone has a smartphone now. And either the deluxe version might be that you would be able to walk around and different features that are different points of interest that are around you might be able to be tracked by GPS of what you can see from where you're standing. Probably the simpler version might be to say that most people in Garrett Park know where they're going, and the people who would be interested in it would know which way they're directing or which way they're looking, so they might be able to pick and choose which things they're interested in clicking on. So looking for feedback on that too, like how complex this thing might need to be. So that's in the works, but it's going to take a couple of years because it's a massive amount of content to pull together on that. It's going to take a lot of volunteer efforts to do write-ups. So if somebody clicks on something, that there's actually something there and it's been vetted and it's accurate. So that's exciting, but it's just going to take some time. And then the third thing is a Chevy House tour is being planned, but it's being planned for 2024. So it'd be kind of a similar size as what was done for Richterville a couple of years ago, but revisiting a Chevy tour that was done, I think, in the 80s. And then on land use advisory committee, I think the big thing is we're realizing we really need to pick up speed on accessory dwelling units, including both the attached ones that are part of a house and the detached ones that would be like an outbuilding around a house. And we're realizing that we don't have a lot of guidance within town of what happens with an accessory structure. That the county has basic guidelines, but there's nothing really Garrett Park specific the way there is about a house. So that could be encompassed in with this. The other thing we know is almost certainly coming is the county has approved its Thrive 2050 plan, which includes the ability as of right of a single family property to be able to build or convert into like a duplex or a triplex or a quadplex. So you may have a lot of houses in Garrett Park that owners would be in the future able to turn into 4 apartments or 3 apartments or build a new kind of side-by-side or triple sort of townhome kind of thing. They're meant to be designed in a way that they fit into the texture of all the other homes around them. They don't look that much different, but I'm not sure how that's going to be done. So that's one of the things we'd also like to kind of get an early start on, assuming that may be coming down the pike from the county in the next couple of years. Seems like they've decided on it either ideologically, they just haven't gotten it on the books yet. So any thoughts that residents have about especially the accessory dwelling units, I welcome them to email that to me at the council email address. I'm happy to like kind of compile those, put them all together. We can review that with all the discussion at the land use advisory committee. So maybe some interesting nuggets and thoughts that residents have. And some of the things that were brought up so far were just looking at like how they might be placed or guided to be placed or not placed on a property, like how close to a house, how close to the sides, how close to the back, how much the bulk might be. We have the ability to do less bulk than what the county might allow. We can't allow more, but we may, if it's reasonable to do so, or if it's recommendable to do so, we may be able to control that. And also just the detailing of it, like how guidance on how they are accessed, how they're lit, how the windows are placed, so you don't have things that look like observation towers in the back of one yard that can see into all the other yards. That's one of the feedback points that we kind of heard. So again, welcome any feedback on that. The more the better, and we can try to tackle it.
When are we gonna have, what's your time frame to when we're gonna have the requirements for allowing people to put accessory dwelling units in their properties? I mean, when is that gonna happen?
But right now, we're talking about the land use advisory committee would talk about how, not whether. So
When?
the issue of whether it would be, that's town manager has been working on that to reverse what was done a couple years ago, where the town has opted out of licensing from the county. But we need to opt back into that to be able to, right now, any kind of a proposed development of an accessory dwelling unit gets kind of stuck there. The permit can be reviewed and that can all be seen as doable permit wise, but it can't be released until they know that it will be licensed. And then the county saying that they don't have the authority to license it, and we don't have a body that licenses it, so it gets kind of stuck there. So if that is rejoined where the county would have the authority to license it, they'd be able to permit it and have the documentation in place to license it. And then there's already currently county zoning on how big and where they can be on a lot. And then the issue we be looking at as the land use advisory committee is, should it be more restrictive or different than the base county regulation because of Garrett Park setting?
But that question about licensing is one, and Barb, I'm going to ask you to chime in if I'm speaking out of turn. That's the question that I've asked that we bring up at the January meeting. Is that correct, Barb?
Yes, that's correct.
So,
We'll flush it out then.
well, not necessarily at that point, what we want the limitations to be on these units, but on the question of licensing, yes.
Okay, good.
Yeah, it's two pronged, and I don't mean to like throw the pressure on you, Barb, but like, cause it's something that does have to be done very carefully, because when it was done before where the town opted out, it was a protective measure against short-term rentals. So we don't want to have a misstep in the other direction and open that door again.
I guess just, and I know this will come up later, so I'll just throw it on the table and leave it there. It's also would be a way of us preventing ADUs if we decided we didn't want ADUs. Or is that not the case? We want to get sued. And that's just a question that I guess we would need to answer in January.
It might be good to get the town attorney's
Yeah,
thoughts on that.
yeah, and I try not to practice law without a license, but I would say that ADUs are a matter of zoning, and the town does not have zoning authority. I think what Stephen is talking about is building regulations that have been allowable up until now. I think we're all kind of trying to figure out exactly what the boundaries are with Thrive 2050, but I can certainly check that with Ron Bull, but I know in prior discussions when Thrive 2050 was pending, we are limited in terms of things that we can do because we're subject to county zoning.
Right. Now, I was bringing it up actually as a question to Ron Bull, for nothing else, because we don't necessarily have to go into, we don't necessarily have to accept the licensing, but on the other hand, if we don't, then that would mean that we potentially prevent ADUs, and we could get sued or whatever. So obviously I'm not aware, but I was wondering if Ron could answer that question before we go to.
Is there an option to not have ADUs in Garrett Park? Is that what you're asking? Is that a legal option for us?
I don't believe it is.
That's your question, is to ask our attorney if that is one of the options for us to move on.
Right.
Okay.
Okay.
They're being held up administratively now just because of the licensing, but we don't, to my knowledge, we don't have the power as a town to say that we don't want ADUs, and so we're going to put it in the ordinance. We can't put it in the ordinance to say that you can't have that use, just like other jurisdictions were not keen on having them. They weren't able to either. So any of the towns like ours that have the limited zoning powers, it's about how you do things. It's not whether you do things.
Yeah, my understanding is the same as Stephen's, but certainly I can confirm that with Ron.
Right, because what it would bring up would be that we would basically have no choice. We would have to allow licensing. It wouldn't even be a debate. It would be we would allow licensing because ADUs are already available, or the ability to put up an ADU is already part of the county zoning, and we would be stopping people from being able to do that by virtue of the licensing. So I would think that we would want to know what would happen if we were to decide to not opt in, but it sounds like we may have to opt in and just no question, we just have to do it. So that's the question around both. What happens if we choose not to opt in?
I think that definitely needs to be part of our discussion, as we dig into this.
Right.
Okay, anything else, Steve, about land use or historic preservation?
No, that's it. I went longer than I meant to, so thank you.
Feeling okay, got a lot done so far tonight. The time is 8:57, and I'm gonna turn it over to Town Manager Barb Matthews for her report, including the November financial report.
Thank you. I'll touch on the financial report first. I just wanted to note that the November financial report does reflect the transfer of funds from account 17.0, the contingency account, to account 11.7, IT operations. The town council was notified of this on the date of your last meeting, which was November 14th via email earlier that day. Among the items that were those funds were used for was to purchase a laptop needed for holding hybrid town council meetings. Also wanted to note that the November report does reflect your discussion on November 14th at the town council meeting about how the town should use the roughly $1 million we have received under the American Rescue Plan Act. As you all know, you agreed to allocate funds for the renovation of Town Hall, as well as the renovation of the town office. Mary Rutke, our accountant, and I discussed how to reflect and track the expenditure of the ARPA funds. And you may have noticed in the capital budget section of the November financial report, we have added a section for ARPA funded capital projects. So look, if any of you have any feedback about how we're reflecting that, certainly that feedback would be welcome. Wanted to also give you an update on the adoption of the new personnel manual. Had hoped to have that on this evening's meeting. It is still in the queue for review by the employment law firm retained by the town. My hope is that that document will be coming before you for adoption, hopefully in January, at the latest February. They did tell me they were going to start reviewing it this week. At your last meeting, we had 2 residents who addressed you about concerns about a gap in street lighting on Rokeby. Following that meeting, I did contact Pepco to try to get kind of a sense of what their process is for installing a new street light. That process is outlined in my report. In the interest of time, I won't go through it. One of the things that I am waiting to hear back from Pepco about, this sort of is their standard process and their standard pricing, is how does it work when an entity like Garrett, such as Garrett Park, actually doesn't use kind of the customary Pepco fixtures. So I did send them a picture of one of our historic lighting fixtures, and I'm waiting to hear back from them about how that affects either the price or the timeline.
Really quick, Barb, have you gotten confirmation that the lights at the end of Rokeby, that the bulbs that had gone out had been replaced? Because I think it seemed like maybe they had been, but maybe they did not. So I want to follow up and make sure.
Sure. Yeah, I did report the lights that were out. We actually have submitted a number of requests to Pepco from all over the town of lights that were out. I'll go back, Joanna, and see if I ever got an auto notification from Pepco for the Rokeby one, because I did file that online.
Thank you.
Just a quick, I'm sorry, Charlie.
That's okay.
A quick side note on that. I've got 2 that go out on my street on the campground, and I'm sure if they're not, I can tell you which poll numbers I'll let you as they are. 2 things I ran into a Pepco to be aware of. One is that they argue with you about the poll number because they use GIS data.
Yes.
Yeah, I know the poll's right because I sent them a picture. The second thing is more important is that it may appear that the light works, but once it goes below 40 degrees, I've noticed that the 2 lights on my street do not turn on.
Okay.
All of it's cold weather dependent.
Okay. Yeah, Phil, I've run into the same problem you have where someone will send me a picture of the Pole number, a number of the poles actually have two numbers on them. One is vertical, one is horizontal. So I usually try both to see what works, and sometimes none of them do. So then I just try to get to the closest street address. Phil, you can either report it online, or if you want to take a picture of the Pepco tags, I'm happy to report it for you as well.
Great, thanks.
Barb, did the maintenance staff go around and see where other black areas were in town to figure out where we might want to add more lights?
They have not done that yet. I checked with Frank on, I think it was Thursday or Friday. They've been busy planting trees and getting leaves up, so they have not had a chance to start that yet.
Maybe they'll do it before the January meeting.
Yeah.
Well, we do it before the January meeting. Frank was starting tonight.
Good.
Just curious, just a side note, Barb, on that, when they go to do it, I'm pretty sure the right-of-way drawings that were done several years back, and I think those were also used for the tree survey, like
Okay.
Jerry Lee may know. But I'm pretty sure that shows most, if not all, the telephone poles.
Okay.
So if they're able to mark like where there are lights, they'll probably be able to mark up drawings of those. That way we know kind of where they are dimensionally from each other.
Okay. Thank you, Stephen. That'll be really helpful. If there's no other questions, I'll just kind of keep moving on. One of the other things that I included in the report, and Kayla can certainly provide more detail because this is one of the projects she's worked on. Earlier this year, you all had expressed interest in installing security cameras at Penn Place. Just to reiterate, we do not have the legal right to install cameras at the MARC station. So our focus has been on enhancing security, both inside Penn Place and on the exterior of the building. To streamline the procurement process, staff identified a competitively bid writable contract with Montgomery County. They have a contract in place with a company called EAI Security Systems, which is based in Rockville, I believe. George Miller and I had done a walkthrough with Montgomery County Police Department some time ago when the major acts of vandalism were occurring. And Kayla and George also met with a representative from EAI. So we are proposing the installation of 4 exterior and 2 interior cameras at Penn Place. There are some technical details that are still being discussed between the EAI representative and the town's IT consultant, which may impact final pricing, but I did include a placeholder amount of $12,500 in the mid-year budget adjustment ordinance that you'll be discussing shortly. Just as a reminder, the camera installation is not currently a funded project. Kayla, anything you'd like to add? Because I know you're much more familiar with the nitty-gritty details than I am.
Barb, I think you hit everything that I was going to say. The important thing is just going to make sure that when the cameras are installed, they are installed in a way that does not compromise our IT security. So Aaron's working through the technical details with Kyle, who is our EAI representative. And Kyle knows that we're waiting on 1, council to fund the project, and 2, Aaron to give the seal of we can do it safely.
And the camera images will be saved for some period of time on the cloud in case they need to be used for evidence.
Yeah, my understanding is the model we're looking at will have a 30-day kind of retention period before they got overwritten. So we should have enough time to go back and maybe download any additional images. That is kind of the standard retention period.
Great.
And you mentioned that that funding this project is included in the budget amendment, the mid-year. If that passes, what is the timeline for having these installed?
Well, just a reminder, the mid-year budget adjustment is a 2-reading ordinance.
Yes.
So I guess, Kayla, if you got the go-ahead sometime in mid-January, what's your thought about how long it would take to install them thereafter?
So I don't anticipate a hold up of the physical installation, but for the exterior camera, my understanding is we would have to get a historic area work permit for the exterior Penn Place through Montgomery County. We did ask staff for preservation, would they consider it? They seemed open to it. I don't know how backed up they are with permit reviews and what have you. So let's say, and I'm going to give kind of some generous padding in this timeline, but I'd rather give you a high figure than a low figure. Let's say 6 weeks after I get to go ahead,
to get the permit from the county, get all the approvals, and then let's say 4 weeks to schedule with Kyle and get their crew out there. It shouldn't be more than a 3-day job, from what Kyle was saying when we walked the property. It's just going to be a matter of finding a window of time, or one, the weather is decent enough for them to actually be working. Two, working around the other jobs that are bigger. One of the things that we might have to be aware of is where we look at placing the exterior cameras will potentially require having a lift come in to allow people to get up. I don't assume there will be any issues with getting equipment. We do it, let's say, late winter or early spring. I'm a bit more concerned about weather. So I would say 10 weeks on the outside, I would hope that we can have it done in a month after getting approval.
Okay, so we're looking at early April would be a conservative.
That would be a conservative. And then the weather would be good too.
And can I get some details on that at some point?
I can send you over the technical specs that I provided, and that was to be the thing.
And what are the ongoing maintenance costs when you install?
Currently, I don't have the ongoing maintenance costs off the top of my head. I can look into that and send over what I get. It would be maintenance and storage of the data too. Yeah, great. So I will send you an email if I have that information and follow up.
Okay,
Can you ask our IT guy if it's possible to store some of it on our own servers?
So my understanding of the current IT concerns is related to the server, of how much access do we give to these cameras and how do we partition it so it doesn't overlap with other information.
Sure,
I can ask them for more details as well.
sure.
But the cameras are available. There's no holdup on the supply chain for getting a camera.
There are no holes in supply chain for getting the cameras, so we should be good on that. Great.
Okay. Lisa had asked about a couple other items. I guess before I do that, though, I would like to give a shout out to our maintenance staff. They did plant 18 trees, and also George Miller provided a lot of very helpful logistical support for the Pratt event. So I did want to note that. With regard to the items that Lisa had asked about, I think we did already address one of those, which was the wall repair at the pool. In regard to the town hall RFP, that was draft was sent to the mayor and town council on November 5th. As I indicated in the transmittal at that time, there was one area of the RFP where there was what I consider to be a fairly sizable gap, and I needed more direction from the mayor and town council. I'm still working to resolve that issue. Hope to have that done soon, and that the RFP will be able to be refined thereafter and sent out.
Is there any concern about timing with relation to holidays? Is there, I mean, would it be your recommendation that it be held intentionally because of holidays and likely?
Yeah.
I don't know what's your thinking on that?
Yeah, I mean, I do think that, dropping RFPs during the peak of the holiday season is not a good idea. Obviously, the goal is to try to get as many good and qualified bidders as you can. Some of you may recall from reviewing the RFP that I had proposed that there would be a mandatory pre-bid conference, just to make sure that people who are bidding actually have enough interest to come to Garrett Park, go through town hall, get some information from George Miller, try to answer some questions early on. Typically, you issue an RFP and you allow about 2 weeks, I guess, before you hold a mandatory pre-bid conference. So with where we are today, even if the RFP was able to go out tomorrow, which it is not, that would put a mandatory pre-bid conference between Christmas and New Year's, which would be very ill-advised in my opinion.
So it's going to wait until the 2023, the beginning of 2023.
Yeah, my hope would be, to get the information, the guidance that is lacking on the one major issue, and to go ahead and have the RFP refined. The town attorney did review the earlier draft before I sent it out to you all. I would like to obviously to route the refinements by you all one more time, have the town attorney just, have the opportunity to look at it in its final proposed form, and then hopefully issue it, right after the New Year's holiday.
Okay, all right. So could we commit to providing Barb what she needs so that we can stick to that schedule? I mean, it's 2 weeks between now and the end of the year. So if we could commit to giving her what she's asked for within the next 5 days, then, even that is still a tight schedule.
Would you be able to finalize, get all those pieces together and pass it on to Ronald if we gave you all that information in the next 5 days?
Oh, sure. Yeah. The other feedback that I had received, it's going to basically probably not even take an hour's worth of work to make those changes. There's just the one issue that I really had struggled with. So yes, if you all can get back to me within the next, 5 days, I will basically make that my focus the beginning of next week and, make the edits that I feel should be made, route those back through you all again. I can certainly text you when it's back in your inbox and then send it to Rumbold.
Council members, you guys all got that?
I'm good with
Got
that.
your marching orders on that?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
Stephen,
Yeah, I'm good.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Stephen.
No, I was saying I agree, and I sent you a message, Barb, about I do owe you something, so I will get that to you
Okay, great.
soon.
In regard to the town office renovation, throwing out an RFP, the town office renovation, at your last meeting, you did agree to provide funding for the project. So to talk to the mayor about it, I've given the green light to Lumber and Light to proceed. So I think one question I would like to just get feedback on or clarification on, because it does impact one small area of how they proceed. My understanding is since Black Market declined to rent tenant space B, what I believe your direction was to go ahead and kind of spruce up the space, paint, carpet, but we are not buying furniture for that space. That's my understanding. If anyone has a different understanding, please let me know that. But I thought we were just sort of sprucing it up and just sort of letting it kind of sit, and then we can regroup and figure out what you want to do with the space. Is that everyone on the same page about that?
yes,
Yes.
Okay.
Do they have a schedule for their design submissions, or?
I don't have that, but I will ask them for one, and I will share that with you all. Let me just jot
Thanks.
myself a note. And then I think the last question was about the Yendel demolition RFP. I kind of am in the same place I've been. I have some sample RFPs that I'm going to sort of use as a template. My plan is to start working on that later this week. Obviously, my focus recently has been the mid-year budget adjustment, and as you all know, I was out for a little period of time for medical reasons.
do you think by the time the next town council's meeting?
Oh, yes.
In January, it'll be out?
That's my hope, Lisa. There is one piece that I will want to consult with the town engineer about, but yes, that's not an unreasonable time frame, I don't think.
Great. Thank you.
So I think I covered everything, Lisa, that you had on your list, but please let me know if I overlooked anything, okay?
Yeah.
Okay, I think that's it, Mayor, as far as my report.
Excellent. Okay, the time is 9:15 and we're actually doing quite well on time. Unfinished business. Phil, you had wanted to mention, wanted to talk about the Waverly sidewalk.
Yes, I just wanted to briefly mention that I looked at some possibilities for lighting, and I put out a little report on my recommendations. One of the things I thought was I'd like to have town council's input. And then at some point when we start moving on this project, then I want to put it out, or maybe even sooner, I would put it out to the town through, putting it on the website or whatever, just to get comments from residents. Is a way of doing something, because what's going to happen is once we've figured out what we want, which could be none of the above, then we need to submit it to the engineer for them to do a photometric study to verify that what we picked will work and do what we expect it to do. So it's kind of part of the going forward before we could issue an RFP construction. We need to take a look at that to then understand, what they're going to have to do to accommodate the lighting. So I just wanted to kind of keep things plugging along, and one of the things was, one of the steps is to select, light fixture to be used. So,
Is the green marble netting fencing on the right side of the sidewalk gonna stay?
no,
You're getting rid of that,
correct.
good,
Yep, got it. That's another reason why I would
right?
like to keep moving it along, yes.
Any new business that we need to? Oh, my goodness, forgot about the action items, thank you. I wonder, it looked like we were in such good shape.
And so, oh, just an observer. We could get, maybe by the end of the year or in the next week or two, we could try and, if anybody's got any comments on the way, put out some to me, and then that way we can consolidate them, so we can try and keep it moving. Thanks.
Sorry about that. Action items. We have a variance request for 10905 Montrose Avenue. Thank you for your patience on this. I know that pushed back about an hour longer later than we were expecting. Councilman Paskowski, you could take the lead on this, this presentation, or just to get it rolling for us.
Okay, and I see there's a couple of people on the screen. I think that's Barb Matthews. I'm not sure who else is on. Is it Mary Ruckay? I'm not sure who the other Barbara is.
Yeah, I'm not either. I think it's Mary Ruckay, probably for mid-year budget adjustment, and I'm not sure who Barbara is either.
Okay, is this reason for asking? I'm curious if there's anyone in the room that I can't see that was planning to speak on this variance, or if I'm going to be doing it, kind of explaining it solo.
Yes,
Sure,
yes,
yeah.
hang on.
Give your name, please, and your address.
All right, hello. Mayor and council members, everybody, I'm Tamara King, I'm a Tamara Mark Design Bill with the architect. I'm actually dealing with the homeowner. Very okay, is there any? And Steve, do you want to start off or?
Yeah, thanks, Tamara. It's good that you're there, and it sounds like the homeowners are there with you.
Yes.
Okay, great. I guess I'm not sure how much time the council members have had to look through it all. Like, if you want me to give like a full rundown through the whole thing, or more of a Cliff Notes version. Maybe raise your hand if you prefer the Cliff Notes. Otherwise, I'll do the full.
We also have brought larger drawings if.
Okay.
I'm sure everybody has had a chance to look at it.
Okay.
I'll still.
There's-
Yeah.
It's like it was half and half, half and half.
I just wanted to make sure I gave a little context of it. Give everybody understand what we actually have. So we do undergoing renovation right now of the house, and we try to actually restore the front porch to be compatible with actually changing house. Because of it, the house is actually built in a way that is actually taking a little bit more than actually it should. So I think what we actually discussing today is basically restoring completely a shaded porch from the original thing, and actually it's actually punching a little bit on the scale. So that's what it is. So it's a very minor change, and we try to actually be as respectful of the architecture. If you have any questions.
And it looks like it was approved by the county. Is that right?
That is correct. We gone ahead and had various from the county and we're also with other or other projects. We split out the front porch variant as a separate.
Yeah, there are four different groups that this has to be approved by. So needs to have a county variance. It needs to have a town variance, which we're talking about now. It needs the county historic preservation review and approval. It needs the town's consulting approval that goes to the county, which they incorporated into there. So yeah, it's a 4-step process for various reasons. This one ended up going a little bit from an unusual sequence, but I think we are in a spot where we can work with it now. So this is the final of those 4 steps that's needed, is to see if it's approvable by the town council for a variance from the town ordinances on setbacks. So what happened is, it was one of the original, or not one of the original, but it was one of the 1920s Chevy houses. There are a bunch on that block of Montrose, I think 7 or 8 of them on both sides of the street. Most of them have been added on to. This particular one has been added on to. I think it was in the 1960s, and it was lengthened, so the house got almost double as wide. It was done at a time when this is not totally pertinent to the variance, but just for some background information, it was when traditional houses were less sought after than more modern homes. So the owner at that time made something that was a lot more simple, more modern looking. So they took away the regular Chevy house front porch that had a lot more traditional detailing to it, and they put a pretty simple, thin, open deck that reached the front of the house. The current owners wish to, in conjunction with the back addition of their house, which has no zoning issues with it at all, or no setback issues with it at all. It's totally compliant and underway. This particular porch in the front, they wanted to get a covered front porch back. You'll see in the document, there was a illustration, I think about 5, 6, 7 pages in, that showed an earlier version of it. It was a little bit more transitional in style. As things were discussed, they wanted to make it a little bit more in keeping or more in kind with some of the other existing Chevy houses. So that's where the design has migrated to. The issue with that is that the normal setback for any house in Garrett Park is 30 feet from the lot line. This one, the existing parts of the Chevy house that remain are only like 23 feet. So that existing open deck in the front, the steps that come up, that's around 18 feet. So all that's well in front of where the setback would normally be. Normally, if you have a house that's back at the 30-foot spot, you'd be allowed to add a front porch to an existing house to get up to like 21 feet. But they wouldn't be able to make a porch within 2 feet. That 2 feet you would be able to gain by the ordinance as it's written. So that really leads towards, to do a porch, it needs a variance to work in front of that 23-foot current setback. The whole situation is explained pretty well as far as how, by George Martin in his report on how a variance has to be checked. There's really like a 6-point checklist that talks about why it is that something is needing a variance. And one of the key phrases in number 1, I think, let me see which page it is. It's number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, page 6. So in number 1, it says, does the lot have unusual dimensions, shape, topography? So that covers some of the lots in town that are very, triangular or hilly or something else where it makes it really infeasible to build something they might normally build because of the lot. But in this case, the important word is or other exceptional characteristics for which a variance is sought. So this one, it's a pretty regular sized lot, but the exceptional characteristic was opined by George to be, yes, that it's in the Garrett Park Historic District. So it's in the county historic master plan district. It's part of that level of review, which is why it needed that county historic master plan or historic review process. So that one was a yes. Number 2, there was opinions on it, but the Land Use Advisory Committee felt it best to defer that question more to the Historic Preservation Committee. So they met last week. There's a report at the end of the document, which kind of picks up on the same things. Same thing with number 3. So it was really kind of a judgment call whether or not the strict and literal application of the zoning does provide unusual practical difficulties or exceptional or undue hardship. That's a very commonly misunderstood thing about variances in our town. I think it's different to say that it's a hardship because I want to do something and I just can't, versus you want to do something that's a little bit more rational in what it's being doing here. And this one is just different because it was opined because it's in the historic district. And 4 and 5 are really talking about like the overall bulk and size, and the house is well under the compliance thresholds for that. Number 6 is just repeating that it's deferring to the Historic Preservation Committee. So there's another write-up in the letter at the end that part 2 about analysis, I think summarizes that pretty well. It's agreeing that, and it's exceptional, just in the opinion, it's an exceptional characteristic that the lot is in the Garrett Park Historic District. Then you can't the second point is you cannot accommodate the porch that's sought to be erected because there's really that dimensional issue I was talking about, like the existing house is a 23. The max you can do by the book is really 21, and it's not feasible unless it's a porch for raccoons to make it in 2 feet. So that one was felt to be a condition that was met. So it was agreed that the strict and literal application would result in a peculiar and unusual practical difficulty to the owner of the property by really shutting them off from being able to put back a covered porch. As part of the review, it's noted that a lot of other Chevy houses in that area, they're all around town even, but especially in that area, they're a lot closer to the front lot line than our current setbacks. And a big reason for this is those Chevy houses were built before zoning and suburbs really even existed. So it was kind of, back then it was a judgment call, like we're going to put the house kind of generally there, maybe take 2 more steps. All right, that's good. Put the stake in the ground. So this kind of development really predates that kind of exact zoning like we have now. So overall, the historic committee supported a variance to, I mean, they're not the deciding factor, the council is, but they supported the idea of allowing a variance to put back a porch to kind of fill in that one Chevy house that doesn't have a front porch on it. So there's some other things about it. I guess they open it up to questions if there's anything I explained that was unclear. There's some comments I might have about it, just more in general, that are separate from the variance, but I would leave those until later so it doesn't cloud the issue. Any
Steve, I
questions?
assume you're recommending approval of this variance?
I support it. The Historic Preservation Committee supported it too, but it's really up to you all. Everyone on the council has
So I think
the right to have an opinion on it.
my reading of the recommendations from the county, from town historic preservation, is that this is actually exactly what we want for the town, is something
Yeah.
just, would anybody shoot me down if I just asked if we need to have more discussion or if we want to just vote?
Well, one quick question, and it's just, I don't know, I guess an error of procedure or something, but in this, I noticed that there was a conditional approval based on a field survey of field verification, and I'm just wondering, has that been completed so we don't have to include it as a conditional, or is it something we need to do as a conditional?
Make sure you, I give the mic to Mike, please. Make sure you speak to the mic.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I can jump in and answer that. When we originally submitted, this was in 2021, which included the rear addition and the front. We had not had the full survey of the house location done, and since then, the survey has been done and so forth. So that was referencing the side yard setback.
Okay.
And that has all been done, and the permit, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, we separated out. Once we were aware that we would have to get a variance for the front, then we separated out the rear addition in that matter of the survey.
Okay, so
Tamara, that drawing you showed us last week, that was that newer survey, right?
Say again?
The
Yeah,
drawings you showed us last, that had your more current, like a surveyor survey.
right.
Yeah.
And since then, there's been a full survey in that reference.
Okay.
I have a question. How does the front setback to this house compare to the house on either side? Are they similar?
Pretty similar, I think. I'm trying to look at there's a picture of them. Yeah, there's a picture on the 7th or 8th page that shows them, like how they're placed. There's the 2 Chevy houses that have the empty lots next to them with driveways on them. You can see them all in relation to each other. The lot on the south is a corner lot, so it's a little bit different, but this new front porch would be probably
Stephanie Salvatore's, got a Chevy house. And then the two next to Stephanie are Chevy houses that have been remodeled to be the long extended. Oh, I'm sorry, the limit. But they have the intention of the Chevy house.
Okay, so this would be, it wouldn't stand out as being much or significantly closer.
Correct, if you look at it in table five, and also, you know, we did a little bit of research online and measured, and there are a number of the houses that are closer than what we have been.
Number one.
I think this front porch may be a little bit closer to the lot line than the house next door, but it'll be further back than the next one down, and possibly the third one down. And this zone is a little bit like a lot of others in town, where the right of ways were from, and the lot lines were from the original plan, but the streets didn't always follow that really accurately. So some of the houses, they feel a little bit, they may have been placed based on where the street was sitting versus where the lot line was. It's just different than how things were done decades later, where somebody would have taken a tape measure and said, you know, go back X feet from the property line. It was more like go back a reasonable distance from the street. So some of these they kind of vary a little bit.
Yeah, I think I'll just mention one other thing. Thank you, Steve, for summarizing everything. The homeowners really felt it was important to go back to the original style of the porch facing the street instead of the sidewalk. So that is and the background of all of this to retain that.
And I think that's definitely what's highlighted from both the county and the town historic preservation.
Yeah, that's a key point I missed. That was very important to the county historic folks and ours. That I believe the homeowners as well, all three, that have that front approach, which is really the traditional porch approach, not the side kind of deck approach. So.
Last question, do they already have a historic area work unit, or are they waiting on this variance?
So we've already applied for that for the problem.
And so you can't get that until we approve.
The county historic area work permit, do you have that yet approved,
Yes, we submitted for that.
including for the porch?
Yeah. All the approvals are in except for the town variance.
Correct.
But normally, if we were doing this again next year on a house on another lot, then probably be more ideal that all the historic committees all signed off on what was being proposed first. That way, because that could change the dimensions that are being asked for in a variance, and then it would go through the variance processes either in parallel or one after the other. But this one ended up working a little bit different on the sequence, but it seems pretty workable at this point because all the other agencies have gotten comfort with this proposed porch.
Okay, thank you.
So I just want to clarify something. So you're okay with not including the field verification because you're satisfied that that's been complete then?
Personally, I'm not seeing how it would be vital because there's already a fairly accurate survey. So if it gets more accurate, it's going to be down to the inches. It wouldn't be a major change. And this porch wouldn't be the closest on the street. I'm not sure if it's even in the top three or closest to the lot line on the street.
So as part of our variance, we would not have to include that condition. It would be okay just to look only at the variance for the porch and not include the condition of field verification, correct?
I think it's a boilerplate thing to have it, but if you already have it tomorrow, we should just get that just to confirm everything in paperwork.
Exactly.
I don't expect it to show anything wildly different. I guess is the way I should have said it.
I just want to make sure ducks are in a row.
Yeah,
With regard-
that's submitted with the permit for the addition, we'll be submitting that for the permit as well. But we have a survey that indicates that we have to follow that.
Any other questions?
I'm ready to vote.
Okay, Steve, would you like to move on this?
I'm not sure what the wording is for doing this, but is it the same, Barb, as like a regular motion or?
I forgot an important piece, and that is that our code calls for a public hearing of this, for variance requests. So we need to open that to public comments. Is there anyone present or on Zoom that would like to weigh in? Okay, not hearing any. Steve, would you like to move that we approve the variance request for relief from the minimum front setback for 10905 Montrose Avenue?
I move that we, as a council, vote on this variance. I support it personally. I would be one aye.
Do you want, I mean, I move that we support, that we provide the requested release support the variance request for 10905 Montrose Avenue.
Second.
Third. Okay, with that, all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing no opposed, the variance request is approved. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you all for all. It's been a process. It's a very painless.
Thank you, Mark. Okay, so continuing, the time is 9:38 and we go to town manager matters for the introduction of 2022-5. You are muted.
Thank you. Before you this evening for introduction is ordinance number 2022-5, which would be the proposed second amendment to the adopted FY 2023 budget. Just as a reminder, in October, you approved budget amendment number 1, which made certain changes to the adopted budget, all specifically related to the eventual development of the Yendel property as a passive park. Included in your agenda packet are 2 different documents as attachments to the staff memo. One is the ordinance itself, including the proposed changes to the FY 2023 budget. As a second attachment, I did include some historical data on revenues and expenses that I thought might be helpful to you. So I'll just kind of, please feel free to stop me if there's any questions, but I'll just walk through the changes included in the proposed budget amendment. So starting with revenues, as I think we talked about over the last couple of months when we closed out FY 2022, we had a larger carryover than anticipated in the adopted budget. So one of the proposed mid-year changes would be to recognize the additional carryover from FY 2022. I'm also proposing a change in account number 2.12, which is personal property tax. At the time we were adopting the budget back in, starting in March, was the introduction. We were having a significant lag in our personal property tax receipts. For no apparent reason, I had reached out to the county. They couldn't explain it either. So in the interest of budgeting conservatively, I had budgeted personal property tax revenues to go down based on the year-end FY 2022 actual receipts and looking at historical trends. I'm recommending that revenues from that budget source be increased by $7,000. I'm also proposing an adjustment in income tax revenues. I think you may recall, going back as far as the budget work session in February, I had shared with you all at that time that income taxes are definitely one of the most challenging revenue sources for anyone to project, whether you're at the county or the municipal level. As you probably noticed in looking at the historical data, there are huge trends from one year to the next. Just under normal circumstances, there's a lot of reasons for that. I think the past couple of years have been particularly challenging with the pandemic. There have been a number of things that happened in the pandemic that impacted income tax filings. You may recall, just as an individual, that filing deadlines were extended. There were also a number of extended unemployment insurance benefits. There was an enhanced earned income tax credit that affected certain taxpayers. And additionally, both individuals and firms received COVID-related benefits through loans, grants, and other means. One of the things when we get our notification from the state each month about when there are income tax receipts is the state will basically provide this very convoluted technical explanation trying to provide some rhyme or reason to income tax benefits. I don't know of anyone who does not budget this revenue source conservatively just because there's no discernible pattern. I am recommending, based on the way that FY 2022 ended, a slight adjustment in income tax receipts of $15,000. I would encourage the mayor and town council to continue to be conservative in estimating this revenue source. There is no downside. If actual revenues come in higher, if that happens to be the case, which wouldn't surprise me, then the mayor and town council can determine at that time how to allocate the supplemental revenues. I did check with a couple other folks, one of the finance directors for one of our neighboring communities, and just to give you an example of how they approach it, they roughly bring in about $3 million a year in income taxes. Well, that's what they budget. In actuality, it has ranged from 3.25 million to 3.5 million, but they have not altered their fundamental approach just because there is no predictability to this. Account 3.1, this is from state of Maryland. Basically, these are the revenues that come from highway user revenues. I am recommending a slight decrease in this revenue source based on the most recent letter received from the state of Maryland in September of 2022. They do provide periodic estimates. So that's what that decrease is for. Account 3.2 is from Montgomery County. This is actually made up of several different revenue sources. One is municipal tax duplication payments. We've already received our payment for the year. Bank shares, which is basically less than $100. And then the PEG operating and capital grants from Montgomery Municipal Cable. As you know, we recently rejoined Montgomery Municipal Cable. And based on that, I would have probably anticipated coming here and suggesting you decrease this revenue source slightly because we are giving up our operating revenues. There is often a lag in terms of when they receive the PEG grants payments from the franchise fees. So what we at the end of September, we actually received several quarterly PEG grant payments all in one fell swoop. So we're actually not going to need to decrease this revenue source. In fact, I'm recommending that you slightly increase it because in talking to Montgomery Municipal Cable, we'll actually have one more operating payment that is due to the town, and then those will cease because that's what we're using as our membership fee. We will get at least 2 more capital PEG grants. So that's the reason for that increase. Account 5.1 investment earnings. I think everyone knows interest rates have been sky high lately. So while that's bad in some ways for many of us as individuals, it's actually really great for a governmental entity that invests money. We have far exceeded the budgeted amount for this year. So I am recommending that we increase that revenue line item by $10,000. Lastly, on the revenue side, and then I'll stop and see if there's any questions. On account 5.4, this is other receipts. You may recall my mentioning in prior financial reports that we have continued to get reimbursement for certain COVID-related expenses, which were not anticipated. We also received a little over $18,000 from the sale of a dump truck just within the last 2 months. And we also received a $12,000 contribution from the attorney representing Mrs. Yendel for clearing out the former residents there. So I am recommending that this line item be increased by $39,000 just based on those factors.
Questions about the revenue side of this proposal?
Nope.
Everybody good? Okay, moving on to expenses. I'll just kind of group several of these together. I think everyone is aware that we have a vacancy that was budgeted in the maintenance division when Butch Frost retired. In talking to the mayor at that time about how to proceed, the labor market has been very tight, as everyone knows. In addition, in talking to George Miller, he and I kind of wanted to maybe explore how things would work if we use contractual services instead of filling that third maintenance position. And that's what we have done so far this fiscal year and anticipate doing so through June 30th. That has resulted in certain savings in the salary, benefits, and payroll taxes line items. In addition, on the benefits side, we had two administrative vacancies at the time the budget was adopted. That would be the town manager position and the assistant town manager position. We budgeted those positions to have full family coverage, just to, since we didn't know who we would be hiring. In actuality, those two individuals did not elect family coverage, so there's some savings from there. And additionally, there were some changes in Montgomery County's offerings. We are a participating agency in their health, dental, and vision programs. That has also resulted in some savings. Moving on with the Archives Committee, we do tend to budget a little bit on the high side, just in the event that we bring in, perhaps some supplemental resources to assist Claire. I did touch base with her before making this recommendation, but based on the hours she's able to work, she does have a full-time job, I believe, as most of you know. We're just not going to spend as much on her salary as we had anticipated this fiscal year. So I am proposing a $10,000 reduction in the Archives Committee budget. That will not affect in any way the rest of their programming that they had anticipated doing. Account 13.5 is Tree Parks and Grounds. As I mentioned earlier, we have been using contractual assistants to make up for the vacancy in the maintenance staff. We have also been making kind of a concerted effort to address a backlog that we have had in doing tree pruning, elevation, and deadwood removal work. So if you looked at where we are for the November financial report compared to where we are with the budget, we've almost spent everything so far. Basically because the budget did not recognize to a large degree the pace of tree work that we would be doing, as well as just the fact we'd be using contractual assistance rather than hiring a staff person. I am recommending that that line item be increased by $46,000. Along the same lines, for road maintenance and cleaning, we would once again be anticipating using contractual assistance to support Frank and George as needed in providing an inclement weather response. And then basically, I am proposing that we take those various operating savings and transfer those to the capital account. The amount of that transfer would be $259,971. I did want to take this opportunity because there was a question about why the operating contingency was not proposed for reduction. And I think the part of the question centered around the fact that we have sort of a $150,000 operating reserve. So kind of what I wanted to share is just a little bit of background on those two different reserve accounts, because they essentially serve different purposes. So the $250,000 that's considered an operating reserve, basically it is akin to an unassigned fund balance. So it is intended and specifically set aside to alleviate any significant unanticipated budget shortfalls and to maintain adequate cash flows. And I'll give you an example where reserve accounts like this can come in handy. I think Phil may be the only person on the call who was in office in the late 2000s when we had a recession and the state drastically cut back funding almost just by the clicking your fingers. And so that's the kind of disruption in cash flows and in services that you just want to make sure you have some funding set aside. So back in February, I had given the then mayor and town council kind of a spreadsheet showing different reserve policies of some of our neighboring jurisdictions. I also had shared with you all at that time the guidelines published by the Government Finance Officers Association. And I redistributed that information to you all earlier today. But essentially that $250,000 that we've set aside is in line with what the Government Finance Officers Association recommends, which is that there be a essentially 2 months of operating expenses. And when this was an issue, the then mayor and council talked about back in February of this year and actually voted to put more money into this account. The contingency account that's actually budgeted in the operating budget in each year is really intended just for kind of unanticipated things that may come up that are unbudgeted. And an example would be the laptop computer that we purchased to hold hybrid meetings. So I did just want to point out that these two accounts, while I can understand why there's some confusion around them, they really serve different purposes. In terms of the not reducing the contingency account, I would note that we have a couple items that we really don't know what we're going to be looking at, such as hiring a traffic engineer to review, for example, the speed bump petition on Weymouth. I would also just note that we did tap the contingency account following June 30th, because we had a couple accounts where we fell a little short as Mary and the auditors were working to book all final expenses. There's certainly no harm in leaving the contingency account as it is, and I would personally feel more comfortable doing so since we're not even halfway through the fiscal year at this point. But once again, if those funds end up not being used, they will just fall through to fund balance, and the mayor and town council will have the opportunity to, look at that revenue, those unexpended funds and figure out how you would like to allocate them. I guess before I move on to the capital budget, are there any questions about the recommended changes to the operating budget from anyone?
Barb, Ken Schwartz has asked to make a comment.
Sure, okay.
Yes, you make a big distinction. You make a big distinction between the operating reserve, which I call the rainy day fund, and the operating contingency.
Mm-hmm.
Say what the purpose of the operating reserve is, or is supposed to be. When I was on the council, I was the sponsor of the amendment creating the operating reserve. I characterized it at that time as a rainy day fund.
Mm-hmm.
And so in effect, when you say, oh, it really shouldn't be used for the purpose of an extraordinary expense that wasn't anticipated, I would disagree. That's what it was intended to do. And as a sponsor of the amendment, I think I have some knowledge of that you might not. Two is it's fairly rare for the council to require the use of the contingency fund. Now, to be sure, you've used about $8,000 this year, but you've used $8,000 in the first 6 months. You would now retain $42,000 for the remaining 6 months. I suggested retaining $22,000 in the account, which should be sufficient for any of the purposes that you suggest. So I don't see the harm in reducing the contingency fund to $22,000. The final actually is going to be for the final 5.5 months of the year. Because by the time this is enacted, it will be well into January. And unless you can point to the items that might exceed $22,000 for the remaining 6 months, where's the risk? And the reason that I think that it's important is we chronically overestimate expenditures and chronically underestimate revenues. And it happens year after year after year. When I make a suggestion to do such things, it's, oh my God, the sky is going to fall, it'll be a disaster.
Well, so I'd like to ask if you're saying that there would be no harm in reducing it, no risk in reducing it from 42,000 to 22,000, what would be the harm of keeping it?
The harm of keeping it is your estimates are bad.
But
your estimates are bad. At the end of the year, you have an unanticipated carryover in the next year. So you can't plan for capital very well because you don't know what your actual your balance is going to be. And it's been varying from 300,000 to 400,000 for the last 4 years.
so
And it's improved this year. I applaud the effort that Art has done. the contingency fund is one that's very obvious, it's rarely used.
Is the concern that we are slow rolling or not engaging in projects out of concern for not having money? Because it's, the budgeting is more conservative, is more conservative side. I mean, is that a concern? Because I don't know that it's necessarily having any impact on the projects that we're engaged with.
You don't know how much money you're gonna have. What you're really saying is it doesn't matter because we're going to run surpluses and surpluses are good. But what you can't do is plan for your capital program. Because you don't know how much you're going to have in the capital account. And you always have this carryover balance. Yeah, that's where most of this 260,000, which is going to go into your capital for right now, that's what carry over, most of it will carry over from prior years.
It's not a, I don't mean it to be flippant, but it is kind of an issue of, I don't know if this is I don't think that this is a problem. I mean, I recognize that, you know, if this were keeping us from engaging in projects, it's not slowing anything down at this point today. Not slowing anything down in terms of capital projects.
It's why don't you increase? You can see about 600, 700, or 80,000.
Anybody want to do that? Let's do it. I mean, like that, I mean, on that, I apologize. But we do have actual.
It started at 50,000 at the beginning of the year for the entire year. Now you have 42,000 for 6 months, less than 6 months.
I'm gonna assume that is based on our some expenses that we not budgeted for, and that you see some expenses coming that we're just not.
Like cameras, we've got a budget, security.
So there's nothing in.
I think we did. Well, one thing I will, while you're looking that up as a side note, I'll bring you is that the ordinance allows the mayor to move up to half the contingency with a 3-day notice to the town council, which would mean that if you cut that in half, you essentially cut in half the amount that the mayor could move. And I think that's something that the mayor would have to comment on. But it would have some possible impact on operations if we needed to do something. And I know we have in the past, as Barbara mentioned, where we had run short on some stuff and we had to make some quick moves. So that was the only downside I could see to it.
So you used 8,000 from the contingency fund in the first 6 months. You're saying that in effect, you need 42,000 for the final 6. That's the synergy.
Right, I understand that, but what I'm saying is,
I understand what you're saying, right? We were reducing the amount of flexibility.
So
The negative is if you take the 20,000 out that I suggest you take out, you could apply that to other capital projects, such as town hall, which you see 0.
But we're not ready to fund it yet. We don't even know what it's gonna cost.
So I would.
But it's still going to cost more than $420,000.
So what
That's what you have done.
What I'd like to do with this is because it's an introduction, we're just introducing this ordinance today. And we have, and I was going to mention this, we have that you distributed to us in favor of info. So in addition to emailing to your perspective on this, I'd like for us to all look at this and consider how it jives with what we want to do with this ordinance. But I'm not trying to give it short shrift, but this is just, we're introducing today. And I would like to keep moving.
All right.
Thank you.
There should be a vote on it.
A vote on whether to read your email.
no, we just have to do a vote.
Let's introduce it.
But you're saying
Tonight is just introducing it, and we can't vote on approving it or making changes to it until next. Well, we can
We said the vote, we had the vote to introduce, that's all.
Right.
we can make changes to what is introduced, yes.
Yes.
Mayor,
do you want me to go ahead and go over the proposed capital changes?
Jean, Jean Haran would like to make a quick comment.
Hi, this is Jean Horan, 4419 Cambry. The only thing I want to camp on to Ken's speech, and he's taught me a lot as being part of the finance committee for schools. There are little expenditures that you can continue to do throughout the year, like a $230 sign to announce the coming of Yandell Park, which I understand was voted down last month, or fixing the bricks that are sinking at the front of the town, the post office. Barbara, thankfully, you said you would take a look into that. But his point is, there are small projects you can spend money on rather than just building up that surplus. I'm just offering you two very simple wins that foster communication, and thank you, Ken, for bringing this up. I appreciate you.
Okay, Barb, we have to, sorry, I'm sorry, Jared.
Well, actually, it's a little bit of control.
Okay. Barb. Jeremy's question has to do with something you can get to discuss, so
Okay, so keep going.
please.
Okay. On the capital budget side, there's currently a very tiny residual amount in the Safe Routes to School contingency, which is obviously not needed because that project is closed out. In regard to Penn Place, I am proposing that we allocate $70,754. There are several reasons for that. We have two planned projects that include the installation of, new doors to the post office. This is getting one of those issues that's getting caught up in the supply chain. The prices just keep going up for the auto door openers. And we still need to get through the historic area work permit process. And talking to George about the already planned exterior building painting at Penn Place, we are noticing that there is an increasing amount of rotted wood that will certainly jack up the cost of that project. Earlier this evening, you all talked about installing cameras at Penn Place. That is a completely unfunded project, was never anticipated. The other thing we learned recently, we had a problem with the building alarm system at Penn Place. And when we called out for service, we were able to isolate the issue. But basically, we've been advised that the building alarm system is essentially obsolete and there are no longer parts. So while I do not anticipate that we will, from a timing standpoint, get to the building alarm system replacement in FY 2023, it's certainly prudent to set aside funding for that project, since it's probably will be something that we undertake early in FY 2024. As you all probably recall, we were approached earlier this year by the Garrett Park Nursery School about a replacement of the asphalt path. Under the lease, that is a one-time obligation of the town to pay for that. When the mayor and Councilmember Schulp and I met on site with our civil engineer, the planned scope of work was expanded to include a boundary and topographical survey. There were some additional repair items that we all noted and figured if we were going to do them, fix everything up, we should do it right. And I know Councilmember Schulp has mentioned that there are some stormwater drainage improvements that may be needed on the property. I did recently receive some information from the engineer, did share that with the mayor and Councilmember Schulp. If the rest of you would like to see that, I'd be happy to forward it to you. But basically, the requested allocation of $75,000 to account 27.4 does anticipate, beyond the other issues that I just mentioned, covers the cost of the engineering and the anticipated construction cost for the work at the community center that simply is unbudgeted. It was not anticipated at all until the nursery school approached us. So if that line item does not get funded, then essentially that work cannot be done.
And they also want a fence.
Yeah, and I did not, based on, there has been no discussion by the mayor and town council or commitment to contribute financially towards the fence, so that the amount that I'm proposing be allocated does not include any funding should you wish to participate financially in any fence installation. 29.12 is a newly created account. In talking to our Mary Retke, We were trying to determine a mechanism to track work performed in public spaces other than Yendel Park. Specifically, what we had in mind was the repair of the masonry wall at the pool and the associated engineering services and survey with that. We are obviously just signed the work order, but Jason Azar believes that the cost of repairing the wall will probably be in the range of $20,000 to $25,000. There's obviously the survey and engineering cost on top of that. So I've requested an allocation to this account of $41,400. Account 29.2 is for the Arboretum. We have, I think as the Arboretum has aged, one of the things Phil Normandy has repeatedly said to me is we'll need to make continued investments. And part of that investment is removing diseased or dying trees. We are already way over budget. We only had about $5,000 in that account to start FY 2023. The Willow Oaks on removal on Oxford was a very expensive removal, mainly because of traffic control as well as the size of the trees. So the requested allocation of $44,953 would basically, bring the account even, but also provide some additional funding since undoubtedly we're going to have tree removal work in the next year or two.
Will that number really be 50,000, or will it actually be 50,000 plus 27,900?
Let me look at that, Phil.
I don't,
Will the number, in other words, we had a budget of $5,047.
I see what you're saying. Yeah, we've already spent 27,904. So the allocation of 44,953 will actually, basically, if you took the $50,000 number and subtracted the roughly 28,000 that we've already spent, it'll leave a balance of about 22,000.
So that line shows 22,000 because at the end of the day, we're in 22,000 actually.
Well, yeah, what you'll see once this amendment is approved is, as you all probably recall in the monthly reports, it'll show the budget figure, what's already been expended and the remaining balance. But from a budget to budget standpoint, we started with $5,047. If you add the recommended $44,953, then the budget itself will be 50, but you're correct, Phil, the available unexpended balance will be considerably less than that.
Okay.
Does that help? Did I answer your question?
Yes.
Okay. Capital planning other, there's a small amount of, there's $5,000 we started with, we spent about $2,003. One of the things, and I think Phil, you and I may have talked about this at some point, I'd like to try to get a better handle on kind of what our, kind of on a multi-year basis, what we're looking at in terms of expenses, particularly for our roads. Among other things. So I did have Clark Azar basically kind of do a pavement assessment. What I'm waiting for from them is, how that pavement assessment would break down into a couple years. The other thing is I've had a couple residents who had reached out to me, and I believe also to the mayor, about deteriorated asphalt curbs. So we do have asphalt curbing in a lot of areas of town. All it takes is one good whack of a snowplow to basically have them crumble. I wanted to try to get an assessment of where these areas are. Do we have certain blocks where we have sort of poor asphalt curbing that we might be able to either do as a single replacement curbing project, or we could combine, at some future date with the Waverly Sidewalk project. So there is some additional work that I'm waiting for Clark Azar to finish up. I don't have the exact cost of that, but as you'll note, I have requested that $5,000 be added to that capital planning other account just so that work can be finished up. Lastly, there was, after taking care of all these items that I just went over, there was some additional funding left over because revenues were increased and operating expenses were cut. My recommendation to you all was to basically take that $64,439 and to actually replenish the contingency account. Right now we have, after moving funding for Yendel to fund certain baseline activities, budget amendment 1 removed about $40,000. We're now sitting with a capital contingency account of $24,392. From, at least from my vantage point, I think that's a fairly low contingency to have in a capital account. So that is the reason why I was recommending that funding, that residual funding that is left over from the transfer would go to the capital contingency account. There were some questions, I think, that Ken Shorts had posed about, why wasn't more money going into town hall? Hopefully this explanation has been that we just have some other capital needs. In terms of where we're currently stand with town hall funding, based on the mayor and council's direction at your last meeting, just about $802,000 of the ARPA funding was allocated for the renovation of town hall. We have an additional $55,000 that is already sitting there for planning related work, and another roughly $455,000 available for construction. So when you add all that together, we currently have a balance allocated to town hall of $1.3 million. I don't disagree that with some of the items that you all talked about back at the end of August, in terms of, perhaps, either constructing a full or partial basement. That $1.3 million is likely to be insufficient if we were to try to pursue all the items that you expressed interest in at the end of August. At the same time, I don't think I would be doing my job if I didn't say that there are other capital needs in the community that need to be met. And we certainly have already initiated some projects for which there is no funding, such as the pool wall repair and the work at the community center, among others. So with that, I think that hopefully that gives you a pretty good overview of the basis for the recommendations. I'd certainly be happy to answer any questions that anyone has.
Could you remind us when the next fiscal year budget sessions were planned?
We'll be doing, the next fiscal year will start July 1. I anticipate that we'll have I think we had talked previously about sort of following the same schedule we did this year, calendar year. So that would mean that there'd be a budget work session sometime in February. That date has not yet been determined. Okay. And then introduction in March and adoption in April again.
Okay, thank you.
We had talked previously about some grants that are being applied for Yandell Park.
Mm-hmm.
Anything come up on those? And if so, is it included anywhere in the budget that we see?
Yeah, the major grant application that is pending is through the Community Parks and Playground Program. I applied for, I'm going off memory here, but it was roughly $196,000. Those awards will be announced in May. So unfortunately, those awards will be announced after you all have probably adopted the FY 2024 budget. The other funding is through the program Open Space Program. Once again, I'm going off memory, but it's roughly $55,000 that has been allocated to the town. The way program Open Space works is that you really have, before DNR would take it to the Board of Public Works, which is a state board consisting of the governor, the comptroller, and usually the state treasurer. We actually have to be further along in the design process. So in talking to the DNR staff person who's assigned to Montgomery County, he recommended that we try to fund some of the design work through Community Parks and Playground if we're successful. And then once the design is finalized, we could basically get Board of Public Works approval for program Open Space. So I guess another way of putting it is program Open Space is sort of a given. We're just not far enough along. Community Parks and Playground is still pending, and we won't know until May.
Okay.
Welch, do they go through the same process that you started the dog park or the park?
That is actually a question that I posed to Barb. Barb, have you had a chance to look at the mandatory referral process for Yandell?
For the dog park? Yeah, I am familiar with it because we didn't have zoning authority in Tacoma Park either. So we would have to go through mandatory referral for certain things. Part of this discussion came up through the Parks and Open Spaces Committee, and it was originally posed to me as more of a legal question in terms of what what uses could possibly go on the dog park. It's really more of a planning and zoning question. So I had reached out to one of the staffers at Park and Planning who is assigned to Montgomery County. I can certainly send you all that information, but park uses are certainly an allowable use on a single family zoned piece of property. But even within park uses, if we were to go to either make improvements to the dog park or put some other type of park or recreational use on the property, we would need to go through mandatory referral.
What about, will we need to go through mandatory referral for the end-out?
I have not had a chance to ask them that. I would think, yes, we probably will. Because it's a change of use and it's not a single family use.
Right, so the reason for needing to do it for the dog park is making a change to an existing park space, whereas the reason for needing to do it for the end-out, if it is in fact required, is because it be converted from a single family home property to a park. So different reasons, but the same result is needing that referral and review process.
Yeah, I mean, in actuality, both pieces of property are, I believe, are actually zoned single family. So if it would be helpful, I had an email exchange with the Park and Planning staff. Would be happy to share that with the mayor and town council if you're not familiar with the mandatory referral process.
That'd be good to see. Thanks.
Okay, I would do that.
Any other questions for Barb, or are there changes prior to introducing this ordinance? Any changes you all want to make, or can we want to introduce it as is and make the changes after, in the next, in the lead up to approval next month, or consideration for approval next month?
One question sort of thing I have is, right now we've got 134,000 sidewalks, and assuming we went forward at some point with, and that's a round number, but assuming we went forward with doing something with Waverly, is it possible for us to get an estimate just to make sure that we're not going to exceed that if we decide to do something?
Yeah, I actually had reached out to Jason Azar at one point. He was unable to give a more firm estimate, Phil, because the lighting did play a role in that. My recollection, and I can try to look it up really quickly, I think that amount was roughly sufficient, but if you want to give me a moment, let me see if I can find that estimate real quickly.
Well, if you want to do it offline too, because
Okay, yeah, I'll do it offline and send that to you. But I think I would also mention, just sort of tangentially to Phil's point, there are still some projects that we're committed to doing, but there are some unknowns, and Waverly would be one of them. To me, taking the residual money that was left over after we tried to address the other needs and putting that funding into the contingency account just allowed more flexibility going forward, since we're not sure of some of the issues, such as the one Phil just raised.
Agreed.
Okay.
Any changes that you all want to make prior to introducing this ordinance?
Just one quick question, Barb. You've got $75,000 as an expenditure for Yandell Park Reserve. Is that money already spent?
No, the 75,000, that's a good question, Lisa. The 75,000 was actually originally committed as a reserve for Yandell. Now that we started spending money, such as on the studies and the planned expenditure for like the demolition of the structure, the money was actually just moved from reserve into the capital budget, so it could actually be expended.
So are we leaving the $75,000 in the budget in line item? I don't know what it is. It's under 1 month.
Yeah, there was a series of
reserve. You've got $75,000 as an expenditure, but nothing.
Yeah, what it means as an expenditure in the context of the reserve summary is just that the money is no longer reserved, it's actually made available. So if you look, Lisa, at the packet, look at the mid-year budget adjustment ordinance. And if you take a look at the line item 29.11, and I will change Yendell Park to Yendell Grove, by the way. Basically, you all had amended the budget so that starting figure of 152, that was a function of the 75,000 that previously was held in reserve, the 40,000 that was moved from contingency, and then there was some additional funding that had just been held in parks and open spaces that was moved to Yendell. So basically the 152,825, of which have already spent 25,000 roughly, was basically the amount that the mayor and town council had set aside to basically pay for certain baseline activities. So
That's inclusive of the 75,000.
yes, it is.
Gotcha. It's just confusing the way you got it set up.
It is a little confusing in that account in particular because money was coming in from all directions. But yep.
All right, what are your thoughts, anybody want to move this, move to introduce this ordinance?
I would like to introduce this ordinance. Ordinance number 2025 for FY 2023 budget amendment number.
There's
1022, I would second it.
Okay. All those in favor of introducing this ordinance? Aye. Any opposed? Not hearing any, the ordinance for the 2023, or the amendment number 2 has been introduced for this. And with that, let's skip over anything major. Don't believe so. So the time is 10:23. Close out this meeting.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
Good night.
Thank you.